Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, I'm here in Manchester, and this is part of my election roadshow, which this week will see me not just here, but also in Birmingham, Newcastle, and in Glasgow. And the idea is to get you involved in this debate. Now, whether you know what I do or what LBC does, then perhaps this is your chance to test us out, get involved, and have your say. And we'll give you the opportunity to speak about this general election, about any issue you feel the public need to talk about. So we'll kick off here in Manchester, the heart of the Northwest, where there are 75 parliamentary constituencies. And in many ways, the Northwest represents the overall Brexit vote that took place on the 23rd of June last year. 1.7 million voters here voted to remain. 2 million voters here voted to leave. 46-54. So as I say, roughly in line with the rest of the country. The big cities voting remain, Manchester 60%, Liverpool 58%, but the smaller market towns and the rural areas being strongly on the other side. At the moment, Labour hold 48 seats in this region, the Conservatives 23, and the Lib Dems 2. And of course, there are lots and lots of marginal seats in this region. But what was going to be the issue that decided how people were going to vote? Well, we were told the whole election was about Brexit. Nothing else was even going to be discussed. Well, I think we can say with some confidence that all of that has changed. And I'm tonight debating the issue of U-turns. You know, is it actually a wise leader that goes for a U-turn if they can clearly see a policy isn't working, or is it a sign of weakness? And I asked that question of you in this context. Just 4 days ago, we had the launch of the Tory manifesto, and there was a big row, if you remember, over social care costs. So up to £100,000 of people's property, assets or savings would be protected, but for people receiving social care at home, they were then going to have to start paying a contribution. But, interestingly, there was no upper cap on how much that expenditure could total. And we had people ringing into this show last Thursday saying, I was going to vote Conservative, but I'm disgusted. I think it's a tax on death. It's a tax on dementia. It's a disincentive for people to save. And clearly, over the course of the weekend, the opinion polls have showed a bit of a shift. No longer are the Tories 19 points, 20 points in the lead. You know, it's down to 13 or 14. Still a very significant lead, but the mood music that came from the back of that manifesto launch wasn't particularly positive. And I have to say myself that I can never remember in my lifetime a manifesto pledge being changed or U-turned during a general election campaign itself. So is it a sign of wisdom? Is it a sign of weakness? I have to say, for my own part, I do think that Theresa May has U-turned now on quite a lot of things. Not just this, but many other issues. Mind you, Jeremy Corbyn, of course, has spent 33 years in Parliament being in favour of Brexit, and now the referendum wasn't, and Jeremy Corbyn wanted to get rid of Trident, but he accepts a party manifesto that doesn't have it in it. So I suppose in some ways, all political leaders are forced at different times to change their opinions. Although I would say, and whether this is to my credit or not, I'm not sure that I U-turned on anything in the general election of 2015, but that's just me. But Theresa May has performed quite a dramatic U-turn. So if you think, look, actually, she's got this right, she's showed she's able to listen to the voters, then call me on 0345 60 60 973. If you think the U-turn really sends a message that, in fact, they're all over the place and they're following opinion rather than leading it, well, text on 84850. Or if you're now beginning to despair of the entire election campaign, then tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Get involved. Call, text, tweet, Facebook message me. And why don't we hear the Prime Minister at her press conference in Wales today?
We have not changed the principles that we set out in the manifesto. We're very clear about the principles on which this system will operate. What we have done is clarified that in the Green Paper, which will be a consultation document, we will have a limit, upper limit, absolute limit on the amount that people will pay for care.
Well, the manifesto did talk about a proposed green paper, and perhaps that was her way out, in a sense, today. But nowhere did that manifesto talk about an upper cap. And indeed, when Conservative ministers were being interviewed over the weekend, they were making the point, look, actually, if you leave an inheritance of £100,000 to your children, isn't that actually perfectly reasonable? So it is a big fundamental change. I'm minded to say that the lady is for turning. And I wonder what Mohammed in Bolton, just down the road, makes of this. Was she wise, Mohammed, to do this, or is it a sign of weakness?
Hi, Nigel.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing? You're right.
I'm well. What do you think?
Nigel, look, here's what I think. I think we all know this election has come about because of Brexit.
Uh-huh.
I think Brexit has basically been, or should I say, the British public have been sold a pup. They've been sold a dream. They've been told that this is going to happen, etc., etc., etc. From the back of that, this election is going to happen, and what really scares me, and it does scare me, is that I look at all the parties. I'm a capitalist, by the way.
Right.
A socialist capitalist, call it. I do. I'm not just all about making money. I have my own business.
So Mohammed, would you call yourself a sort of free marketeer?
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
100%. So what scares me is I look at all our political leaders, and what scares me is that the leaders, including the people that they're surrounded by, have come up with policies and are making decisions which are bad decisions. It's scary. It really is scary. If a businessman was to run a business this way, then we'd have major problems.
Yes, and if you had shareholders to answer to, Mohammed, you probably wouldn't last very long, would you? But let's say, Mohammed, that the decision not to have an upper cap on social care at home, let's say that was a bad decision. In the light of a bad decision, was it wise 4 days later to effectively reverse it?
Look, here's the way I see it. First of all, it was a bad policy anyway, because as anybody who bought their houses or, worked hard to buy a house, the biggest asset most people in this country have is their house. And
yes.
what she did, and what they did was they came up with a policy which basically said, look, this is the crazy thing. The majority of you, your biggest asset is your house, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to let you keep 100 grand, and then we're going to take the lot.
Well, Mohammed, if though, Mohammed, you're in residential care, of course, they could have taken, your savings down to an even lower level. So, there is a little bit of give and take on this. So, Mohammed, they made a mistake. Let's just agree. They made a political mistake. They've reversed it. Is it wise to reverse that mistake within 4 days?
Yes, if you want to win the election and try and get some of your core supporters back.
Right, so will she? Will she, Mohammed? Yes. Will she? Because I had people ringing on this show last Thursday saying, I've been Tory all my life, I'm 80 years old, I've worked like hell since the 1950s, I've saved up, I own a modest property, I want to leave it to future generations, and I'm not going to vote Tory. Do you think with what she's done today, she'll get that kind of voter back?
Yes, she will.
She will?
Yes, she will. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because if you look at what Labour is doing, and if you look at what Labour and the Lib Dems are proposing, that's even more scary, right? However, now I'm kind of 50-50, and the thing that's going through my mind is basically this. And I've always voted Tory, whether I've agreed it, whether I've disagreed with some of their policies, whatever it may be. I've always, voted Tory. And the thought that's going through my head right now is basically this, that if I was, the European leaders, and if Theresa May and her party came into power, I would basically make sure that she would get a really, really hard time, purely and simply because of personalities, right? It's nothing to do with common sense. Now it's got very, very personal.
Well, yeah, but Mohammed, we'll get to that in the next few weeks, I promise you. But I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you for the call, Mohammed from Bolton. And I'm keen to get callers from other parts of the Northwest. And it may be, in many cases, the first time you've really heard much about LBC. We've had advertising vans going around Manchester today. And, of course, I want to hear from people with all political backgrounds. And the European negotiations, well, a week after this general election, we will start the negotiations in Brussels. I'm quite pleased on one point that last week I said to Mr. Barnier, I said, if you make a ridiculous sort of €100 billion charge, we'll have to walk. And David Davis over the weekend said, look, they've got to be reasonable or we'll walk. And today, Monsieur Barnier was saying, no, we don't want the Brits to walk. We are going to make sure we're reasonable. Maybe it's a straw in the wind that we're heading in the right direction. I don't know. Kumar in Ealing, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Was she wise to U-turn?
Today, in my view, humble view, May debased politics on three levels. First of all, she showed how opportunistic they are, that they can go from a principled position on Friday where they're arguing that we want to treat everyone with fairness, i.e. residential care versus domiciliary care, and I almost bought it. It seemed a very logical, and the key word is fairness. And she's completely flip-flopped, just showing what an opportunistic party they are, and I'm sorry to say they're back to the nasty party. Second thing is she debased politics by denigrating Corbyn. Now, to me, politics has always been about your ideas versus my ideas, your opinions versus my opinions. Not about you, not about me. And whilst, Mr. Farage, I completely and 180% diametrically opposite to your politics, I respect you, and I think you're a formidable politician, in the same way I could say Corbyn. The third thing I would say, may I make a point on immigration?
Yeah, quickly, yeah.
Okay. Nowhere in the Tory manifesto did they say how they're going to pay for, assuming for one moment that they can get immigration down from 300,000 to 100,000, that means we're going to lose 200,000 people who are paying taxes. Now, assuming everyone of those 200 pays £5,000 tax, that's a 10 billion hole that they haven't accounted for.
Actually, Kumar, that is a slightly separate debate. But remember, there are some people that come to Britain as immigrants who make a net contribution. Equally, there are plenty that come to Britain who do not make a net contribution because the costs of the health service and everything else far outweigh the tax they pay.
But Kumar, one final point?
Go on quickly.
Okay. 30 years ago, there were 15 people in work to generate the taxes for every pensioner. Today, that 15 is down to 5, and in 10 years' time, it'll be down to 3. In Germany, it's already 1-to-1, which is why Merkel allowed. My question to you, sir, is that do we then tax the 3 more, or do we reduce the benefits of the 1, or do we need a balanced, as I spoke to you the other day, balanced immigration policy?
We need a balanced immigration policy, Kumar, that brings in highly skilled people who speak the language, integrate, and pay much more into the system than they ever take out of it. Kumar, I thank you. Kumar there saying that he feels that Theresa May has debased politics by what she's done today. Right. Yes, we're in Manchester tonight, part of my election roadshow, going around the country. It's Birmingham tomorrow, Newcastle the night after that, and Glasgow on Thursday. And we're taking LBC out round the country and saying to people who may not know the station, here's your chance to get involved. We speak to people from all political views. And the big debate is, Theresa May has performed a pretty dramatic U-turn just 4 days after the Conservative manifesto. And the question is that an act of wisdom, or is it an act of weakness? Now, one idea here is, Nigel, a credible alternative to the dementia tax is a 10% tax on all properties to be invested with a profits ring fence for a care fund. That comes from Fawn in Bromley. Fawn, the idea that all of us would put 10% of the value of our properties into the government's hands for them to invest on our behalf, given the track record of things they get wrong, I don't think that one's going to fly somehow. Nigel, why won't people dare say that Theresa May really wants to lose the election Theresa May is deliberately making herself unpopular to keep us in the EU. Sorry, don't buy into that. Too conspiratorial. Nigel, this U-turn over social funding just goes to show what a weak Prime Minister Theresa May is. I don't trust her, so from now on, I'm going to vote Corbyn. And that's from Paul here in Manchester. Well, we've had people telling us that it looks weak, but Mohammed from Bolton said actually he thought it would help her win back some of those voters who were ringing in last Thursday very, very angry. People who had been encouraged to be thrifty, who'd saved money and did not like the idea there was no upper cap on the costs of social care at home. Let's go to Ali in Barnsley. Good evening. Do you think she was wise to perform this U-turn?
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I think it's not a sign of wisdom. It certainly is not. I think, in my opinion, it's a sign of lack of principle, because it's not certainly wise to put a policy document together full of these half-cooked policies where members of your own party, the senior members of your own party, are criticising some of the key pledges in that document. And I think, you couldn't make this stuff up, could you? The irony there in a chapter where it says, under the title of, the good that the government can do, in the same document, you got stuff like the dementia tax. I mean, it's not really wise, it's not really principled to make money out of other people's suffering. I mean, you would expect the Tories to treat the grey vote as a sort of a consumer sort of group, but this, I think they've got.
Well, I think Ali, the thing is that actually George Osborne and David Cameron did. I speculated on Thursday that Theresa May was doing this because she thought that grey vote, as you call it, was actually in the bag anyway. And maybe what's happened over the weekend is she's realised that it's not, and that the election that she wanted to be dominated by Brexit is now actually today being dominated by something else entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think she's got it wrong. It's not a sign of maturity. This image that she was presenting of herself, of this mature sort of technocratic sort of politician who would steer us out of the EU, and this mature leadership that she was presenting has just, the image is breaking down. And I think she's not, in my opinion, she's not a leader. She's not. She talks about strong and stable leadership. Never mind strong leadership, but she's not a leader. She's a follower, and she's a follower of the public opinion. She follows devoutly her.
I have to say, Ali,
real
I have to say,
master, who is
I'm struggling.
Crosby.
I'm struggling to counter you here. I really am struggling quite hard. And in fact, this is not the first thing she's U-turned on, is it? Because, during the referendum, she said staying in the European Union would make us a safer country, and she's changed on that. She repeatedly said there'd be no general election, and there was one. Now, people are allowed to change their mind, Ali. They are allowed to do that. Of course they are in politics. And through life, we all, at times, change our opinions. But to change something that was in a manifesto with just 17 days to go before voting, I think is unprincipled. Kumar, before the break, said that he thought she debased politics. Would you put it as strongly as that?
I think not as strongly as that, but I think these U-turns and these changes in policy are becoming part of their British conservative DNA, because this is not the first time we're witnessing this. We've been witnessing this in the past 7 years. After every single budget, they've had to back down on some of the policies.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's right, because her first budget, there was a dramatic U-turn on as well. Ali, are you normally inclined to be a Conservative voter?
No, I'm not. I'm not a voter, as I said to you earlier before.
Okay.
I'm not a voter, and I've never sympathised with the Conservative Party. Right. Not at all.
And so nothing's going to make you vote in this election, no?
Definitely not, no.
No, fine. Ali, I tell you what, you won't be on your own, Ali. The turnout is going to be lower than most people can even imagine, in my view. Annie in Hastings, are you one of those people who thinks it's an unprincipled move, it shows weakness, it shows opportunism, or do you think she thought she'd made an honest mistake and now was the time to change?
Well, Nigel, first of all, could I say how privileged I am to speak to you?
Well, that's very lovely of you. Thank you.
Oh, my God, Nigel Farage. I can't believe
Right. Well, now we've got... Lovely though that is, I want you to tell me what you think about Mrs May's actions, please.
Well, what I think is this, because I'm actually a Conservative voter since 1980s.
Yep.
I was a young thing in 1980s when Margaret Thatcher come to power.
Yep.
And I was a young hippie, you know, doing my little thing. And a woman come to power. Yeah, let's support Margaret Thatcher. It didn't all work out, but a lot of it did work out. And what I would like to say is it's okay in politics to change your mind. Like the press call it U-turn, U-turn, U-turn. But it's okay to listen to the people. Like if you keep putting a policy, right, and they got a feedback from the public that it's not going to happen. It's okay for you to go back and say, okay, we've listened to you, and now we're going to still project that policy, but we're going to change it to this, and this.
I completely understand, Annie. I completely
listen to people.
I get what you're saying, but equally, my experience is this. In the last general election, I did the big leaders debates. I made a point about health tourism. I said I thought it was outrageous that anybody could come here from anywhere in the world, get an HIV test, and then if they were HIV positive, get drugs to treat it that would cost up to £25,000 per person. And that what was happening was that HIV treatment for British taxpayers actually was being diminished because of it. Now, I met Annie with the most astonishing wall of abuse. I got abuse from Cameron, I got abuse from Clegg, I got abuse from Miliband, obviously, and everybody else, Nicola Sturgeon, you name it, and much of the press. Do you know what, Annie? The fact that short term I was getting heat over it didn't change my view that actually, unfortunate though it is that there are HIV sufferers all over the world, our job in this country and the National Health Service was to put the priorities of our own people first. And do you know what, Annie? I toughed it out. You did tough it out. And I was right to. And I was right to tough it out because actually, but 4 or 5 days had gone by and the Daily Mail, who were not being nice to me in the campaign, had a big opinion poll that showed well over the half the country thought I was right to have raised the issue. So, Annie, I get what you're saying. There are times when people need to listen. But I think, my view, Annie, is this is a knee-jerk response. And actually, if she believed in the policy last Thursday, she ought to have stuck to it. That's my view, Annie.
Yeah. Can I just say something now, please, Nigel?
Of course.
Right. What I think is this, right? I've been a Conservative voter since Margaret Thatcher. And I think in politics, we're like blind. We're like, we follow some light.
Yeah, but
now, all of a sudden, I'm in my 70s now, Nigel.
Annie, are you still going to vote Conservative in this election?
No.
You're not. So
I'm voting UKIP. But I have to wait for their referendum to come out. Or no, not their referendum. Their
manifesto
to come out in Wednesday.
That's right. Annie, I'm going to have to go. Thank you for your call. Fascinating call. So I'm still looking for callers from all over the country, especially if you're here in the Northwest. Do call us. LBC are in town, and I want to hear from people across the whole country with all political views. OK, the Green Party launched their manifesto today, and they want another referendum on our membership of the European Union at the end of the process, and they kind of think that the younger generation in this country has been betrayed. So they felt pretty strongly about that. But the most eye-catching, I think, of all of the proposals, and bear in mind the Green Party have 2 leaders, co-leaders. They have Caroline Lucas and Jonathan Bartley. And he talked today about the Green Party's proposal to scrap all existing student debt, by which I mean not just stopping people having to pay tuition fees going on from here, but scrapping all the amounts that people currently owe. Estimates on that are that it would cost something like £14 billion. The Green Party, who are putting up 475 candidates in this election. And, of course, they do have that seat in Brighton that Caroline Lucas has won and held at a subsequent election. In other election news, there was an election poster launched at the weekend, a Lib Dem poster. Don't know whether you saw it online, but we'll make sure that LBC's Facebook page and website has it. And it was a picture of my face with Theresa May's hair, Theresa May's sort of coat stroke dress, and a set of a pearl necklace. So it's my face, it's Theresa May's body, outside number 10. It's from the Liberal Democrats, and it says, vote her, get him. And that has led within the Green Party. It's backfired. There is uproar in the Lib Dem from their chairman of their trans community. And I have to say, I can't quite work this out. I mean, I'm not even a candidate, and I still finish up in the middle of an election row. So there are things that have been going on over the last couple of days, and you may have noticed Donald Trump on his first tour, starting off in Saudi Arabia, currently in Israel today, and a very strong speech saying we want to work with Muslim countries, but you've got to drive the bad guys out of your own places of worship. Interesting. Martin in Glasgow. We're going to be in Glasgow on Thursday, but for now, Martin, what do you make? What do you make of Theresa May's U-turn? Was it the right, wise thing to do?
Good evening, Nigel. As far as I'm concerned, is utter incompetence. When I heard it the other day there, I says political suicide. Now that they've U-turned, how does it look to the public now? They can't make up their mind. It's ill thought out. Could this be in other policies? There's been other situation during this campaign. By the way, may I say I'm a Conservative stroke UKIP voter. I know it's unusual, but I am. And there was a thing about fox hunting. I thought to myself, why bring that up now? And then there was the immigration thing, still promising they'll get it down to hundreds of thousands.
Tens of thousands.
Or tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Well, and I thought to myself, my head was in my hands at that point. And then when I heard this last Thursday, that was the final straw. Now, I do realise in the social care you do need to get things under control. You do need to manage things. But now, in order to win this election, is not the appropriate time to make yourself out to be incompetent. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, but what she's done, Martin, and I do just wonder. I mean, obviously Linton Crosby is there behind the scenes doing the big picture stuff. I do actually wonder, in terms of the day-to-day management of what they say and what they do in the media, I do wonder whether maybe the people around her are somewhat inexperienced and simply haven't been in this kind of election campaign before. But, Martin, she wanted to fight this election on Brexit, didn't she? She wanted to make Brexit the central issue. And all the while, Brexit was the central issue. She had an absolutely huge, commanding lead in the polls.
Well, that's another point I thought, Nigel. I know you discounted one of the person that sent in saying it's a conspiracy theory, but even I thought, this lady's a Remainer, and are they trying to do things to not win an election, which is incredible to think a political party I know would do that, but it's become so ridiculous.
Do you know, Martin, if you and I were sitting in a bar in Glasgow, and even downwind of a few, I would still find that very difficult to believe. I think she wants to be Prime Minister with a big majority more than anything else. I think her motivation is career success, and that matters to her far more than policy. That's what I think, Martin.
Well, I think you could be right, Nigel, but the point is at the moment it's not going that way. I don't think they'll get this wonderful landslide that's happening because it's an apparent or perception that's going on with the public of incompetence. It's absolutely ludicrous to me. And it'll be interesting to see, obviously, what happens on the 9th of June, but really and truly, investigation should be made here. In fact, anybody with any common sense can see this has been utter nonsense.
OK, no, Martin, couldn't be clearer. They are incompetent, says Martin in Glasgow. On text, I get, Nigel, a person changes her mind. Good, says Kate. Nigel, I think all the manifestos were rushed through. Corbyn should think about U-turning on some of his Fantasyland policies. There's nothing wrong with politicians changing their minds. It takes guts, says Graham. Yes, Graham, but when you've got a general election 17 days away and you only issued this policy 4 days ago, Maybe Martin in Glasgow is right. Maybe it is sheer incompetence, or maybe it's just a knee-jerk reaction to suddenly taking a lot of stick. Josie says, given my life experience, the inheritance cap is an insult. There we are. What does Ray in Stoke-on-Trent think of this story? Ray, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Top man, I've voted for you since you came into being, matey. I've met you once up Hanley in Stoke-on-Trent here, and I think you're a great bloke. But you don't believe in conspiracy theories. I think Theresa May is trying to throw the election, and the biggest joke any leader of the Conservatives ever told was David Cameron when he said, we're all in it together. He meant all the politicians are in it together, Nigel. I believe that, mate, because 70% of the politicians believe in staying in Europe, and about 30%, if that, don't want to...
Oh, well, that certainly was true, Ray. But, I mean, look, the opinion polling we saw last week showed that just 22% of people now really feel bitter about the referendum result and would like the chance to reverse it. And 68% either think it's great or think we should just get on with it. And I think in the face of that, it's very difficult for the politicians to really go against us, isn't it?
Yeah, it is difficult for them, but where there's a will, there's a way with politicians, I'm afraid. I don't trust any of them.
I can tell. There's a very healthy dose of cynicism from Stoke-on-Trent there. But on the social care point, Ray, I mean, did she make a terrible mistake last week?
She did. I think she did, yes. Like, there's a lot of people who have worked hard, who've bought the house, who've even bought the council houses, and some of them, sky-high prices now, particularly down south.
Yes.
And she's just taking it all off them. But it's good that she's done a U-turn, because it shows she's listening.
Right, OK, Ray, so your point is that in this particular case, she made a big mistake, and U-turning was an act of wisdom as opposed to an act of weakness, yeah?
I think she's trying to chuck it.
Right. Well, Ray, thank you. Well, that's 3 people so far have suggested to me that Theresa May wants to throw the election because she really wants us to stay part of the European Union. I am struggling with this. I've been accused of all sorts of things over the years. I've been accused of being a conspiracy theorist. I'm not yet buying in to this one. Adam in Leeds, tell me, what do you think? Was she wise to change her policy on this? Good evening.
How are you? Good?
I'm very well, but I'm just fascinated to see what people think about this.
Yeah, well, I'm traditionally a Conservative voter normally, but I'm going to have to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. So I'm a bit out of breath. I've just run up the stairs. I'm going to have to vote Jeremy Corbyn this time because I feel his manifesto is the strongest of the parties. I think Mrs May has made a U-turn, but politicians are elected on mandates. She hasn't specifically got one. However, she's listening to public opinion, and she wants to obviously scrap this tax on all people, essentially social care taxation. And I think that's personally a good thing, but obviously, she's made several U-turns for Brexit, notably the national insurance rise.
Yep.
I think there was another one I forget. I think...
But Adam, let me just put this to you. That what we've heard for the last 3 weeks, over and over and over, is strong and stable leadership. I mean, they keep parroting out this phrase until many of us actually are getting bored with it. And what I'm asking you as a traditional Conservative voter is, are these actions, and you've listed them to me, not the other way round, are these actions, are these U-turns consistent with strong and stable leadership?
I would have to say, and I don't normally agree with you, Nigel, there are some things that I do agree with you on, and there are some things that I don't agree with you on, but that's democracy, and I genuinely believe doing things in the national interest, rightly or wrongly, that's a separate matter. In this instance, I think, personally, Mrs May isn't showing strong and stable leadership, and then yet the Conservatives have the audacity to say Jeremy Corbyn is not strong and secure, or stable, sorry.
Yeah.
I think, she's not shown strong and stable leadership.
Well, and actually, Adam, today she was saying Jeremy Corbyn said nasty things about me, and he was horrid. So we had to change the policy. Very odd, really, isn't it?
Well, the pot call the kettle black there because it must be a nasty party. But then again, Nigel, I would have to say that, Jeremy Corbyn, I'm from Leeds, and he came into Morley, he went into neighbouring Bradford. The man has been portrayed by the mainstream media as somebody who's weak.
Yeah.
But, nobody's really saying Theresa May's weak.
Adam, one of the things I said last week, whatever mistakes Corbyn's associates have made, and one or two on this radio station, LBC, but he himself actually is loving the campaign. He was speaking at a rock concert yesterday in Manchester to 60,000 people. He's enjoying it. Adam, I thank you. Earlier I mentioned one of the candidates in the Brighton Pavilion seat earlier, and I want to let you know the others who are standing in that seat. Ian Buchanan for UKIP, Solomon Curtis for Labour, Emma Warren for the Conservatives, and Nick Yeomans as an independent. So I'm still appealing to callers from the Northwest to get involved in this show live here from Manchester, but I'm getting calls actually from all over the north of England and the whole of England. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7. This election is not just about Brexit anymore, because we're talking about social care costs, and my guess is we're going to go on talking about them for some time. 4 days after the Conservative manifesto, at which there was to be no upper limit on what the costs that could be charged an individual against their property for social care at home were introduced. We're now told, actually, there's a U-turn and there is going to be a cap. And I've got callers telling me that's wise, that is sensible, that is listening to the public. Other callers, a little bit more sceptical. Luke in Derby says to me, it wasn't that long ago that the Tories U-turned on tax increases for the self-employed. It's one U-turn after another. Seems far from the strong and stable government she keeps on going on about. I wonder what Andy in Nottingham makes of this debate. Andy, good evening.
Evening, Nigel. Pleasure to talk to you. One of the only politicians I've ever known answer the question asked of him. Brilliant.
Well, that's very sweet of you. And I have to say, Andy, whether it's because I was right and I'd thought it through, or whether because I'm just simply pig-headed, I didn't U-turn on anything in the general election of 2015. In fact, when they criticised me, I just doubled down and kept on going. But that's
because you're from the real world and you're not a professional politician. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't necessarily mean it was the right approach, but that was that was how I did things. Yeah. But what about the Prime Minister, Andy? What do you make of it?
Well, I can't understand how all political parties seem to surround themselves with idiots who don't understand the common man, and it's the common man's vote they're after. Yes. She seems to have got this manifesto completely wrong. I mean, even the winter fuel allowances are a mess, the social care's a mess. Gordon Brown got his 10p tax completely wrong. Osborne got his pasty tax in a mess. And they've got thousands of civil servant advisors and political advisors. Even your guy in Stoke, I mean, what a mess he made of that. The Greens can't even find a leader. They have to have two. It just goes on and on.
Well, no, they think it's more democratic having two leaders, you know.
Well,
but I mean,
why not
Andy...
have 22 then?
Well, right. But Andy, I mean, OK, let's say you've got a retired pensioner couple living in Surrey. The house is worth £2.5 million. They've got a big pension coming in. They've got big stock market savings and dividends coming in. Is it entirely unreasonable that the government should say these people really shouldn't qualify for a winter fuel allowance?
No, they should just have it, but it should just be added into the pension. Then it's taxable, so the government will get half of it back straight away.
Right, OK. No, I think that's a very good idea. The simple way of doing it, yes, is you put it onto the pension, and if you qualify for tax, you pay tax. And if you no, I agree with that. Andy, that's a very, very practical view. Love to hear what other callers think about that idea, because that would be a good way of doing it. So you're pretty... I mean, Andy, do you feel like voting for anybody, given your analysis of the current political scene? And we appear to have lost... We've lost Andy. I was enjoying that, and Andy went. Let's go to Scott in Southend-on-Sea. Scott, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. What about the Prime Minister? Is she right?
Well, I don't think necessarily about right or wrong in this kind of political circumstance. I really feel that what's happening currently in the climate is a purely anti-establishment vote. And if we had a left-leaning government, we'd be going right. And if we had a right-leaning government, which we do, we'd be going left. It's exactly the same what we've seen with Le Pen, and it's exactly the same what we've seen with Trump over in the States. And I really feel that regardless what the policies are at the moment, people just feel like they need to vote for change, which is exactly the reason why Brexit came up through and exactly the reason why Corbyn's writing up in the polls at the moment.
Do you think, is that part of Corbyn's appeal, the fact that he is so anti-establishment?
I don't think so. I think it's essentially Theresa May is making her own demise with just being such a hard blue. And, you know, the general population really feel at this moment in time they need a government which are going to support them. And Corbyn is appealing to the younger generation. And at this moment, without even doing anything, they've appealed to the elder generation because the Conservatives have gone such a hard and fast right turn on social care that kind of policy is just going to be a demise of any kind of government. And I genuinely feel that in this current circumstance, a leader like Corbyn, without strength through power, without strength through, you know, oppression, is actually the kind of a leadership we need. My personal opinion.
No, I get you. No. I mean, look, you know, Corbyn has had a very good week, and whatever's written about his former links with the IRA, and he won't denounce them, and all the rest of it, I guess the point is we all knew that about him anyway. But he does seem to be enjoying the campaign trail more than any other leader at the moment. Scott, do you think, I mean, is it your feeling, Scott, that this narrowing in the polls that we've seen could continue over the next 17 days?
I certainly feel so. And if it's definitely not over the next 17 days, it will definitely be over the next decade, as there definitely seems to be a rising in the liberal mentality in regards to social care. We're not necessarily talking about a hard and fast immigration policy in regards to humanity care, in regards to overseas budgets, blah, 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 etc. But more just in the fact that if you're at home, there should be a domestic policy which makes sure that the people that have worked hard for their lives are not going to be let down at the moment that matters the most. And Corbyn is appealing to that kind of demographic, which seems to be rife within young people especially.
But he's U-turned as well, Scott, hasn't he? 33 years he opposed Britain's membership of the European Club. Referendum comes along and he backs Remain. So he has U-turned as well.
Well, generally speaking, though, about the European Union, and to be honest, I was very on the fence with this, and I must admit your YouTube videos definitely swayed me towards a Leave vote. I must admit I voted Remain purely for the fact that I think that bridges are built and they shouldn't be burned. And in regards to, politics in this kind of circumstance, and especially economics, that as a stronger country, we should be together. But I am not saying that we should be united together, but we should definitely be working with the people that
Scott, we're not going to rerun the referendum here, but I would argue that we've escaped from a burning building. Scott, I thank you very much for your call, and I go to Hazel in Sandhurst. Hazel, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. We spoke last week when I was livid about all of this.
Yes. So how do you feel now?
Just the same.
Go on. Explain.
Well, I mean, everyone's entitled to change their opinion, but this, I mean, it wasn't thought out originally. The thing is, with Theresa May and her party, they think they know what the public want, but it seems they haven't got a clue. Let them walk a mile in my shoes, or so many members of the public. What I would say, Nigel, from my humble background, which I told you about last call, I'm a child and family counsellor, and feelings and emotions run high, and they drive thoughts. And feelings are universal. Experiences are unique, and they just haven't got that. They just don't get it. And I still will not be voting for Theresa May and her party because she will still want to take my house that I have worked so hard to get. I live in the south of England, and potentially my house is worth about four and a half. You know what I'm trying to say?
450,000, not 4.5 million. 450,000. Is that what you're saying?
Rubbish and maths. That's precious to us.
I do. Hazel, I remember you calling in last Thursday and feeling very strongly about this, and it's very important to have you on here. But, I mean, what Theresa May has done today is she's directly appealing to people like you. She's saying, Hazel, in Sandhurst, I, the Prime Minister, am listening. So why are you not satisfied now?
It's too little, too late.
Too little, too late. She hasn't convinced you. Hazel, thank you ever so much for your call. Well, as I would have expected, a huge range of views and opinions here tonight. Mohammed from Bolton, Annie from Hastings, they think actually this will help Theresa May pick up some of that support that she's lost. My view is that when you make a decision, when you've thought it through, when you've made a manifesto commitment with just 3 weeks to go before an election, you expect to take some stick. It's how politics works. What you do is you double down, you make the argument, you turn public opinion around. I feel what we've seen today is an act of followership as opposed to an act of leadership.
Well, thank you, Donald. And, of course, Donald Trump gave a big speech on international jihadi terrorism and what to do about it in Riyadh just the other day. And later on in the show this evening, we will have the Deputy Assistant to President Trump, Sebastian Gorka, on the show to talk about what they're trying to do in America to tackle terrorism and what they think across the world we should be doing. We in fact broadcast last night's show from Manchester, and we hadn't left very long when these news reports started to filter through. The fact that 22 people have been killed, including children as young as the age of 8, is something that I think is truly shocking. It's been condemned, of course, by all political leaders and by all religious leaders. I have to say, for my own part, I think perhaps we've reached a new low. The targeting of young girls at a concert just seems to be about as low as you could possibly sink. And I know that a lot of people are very, very upset and shocked. I also know a lot of people are really very angry. But we have been here before, haven't we? We've had these twin emotions of shock and anger, and we get the statements from our leaders. But I wonder whether perhaps a mood that is beginning to creep through today, and we'll see more of in the next few days, is, and the question I want to ask you tonight is, what do you want the government's response to be? If you were sat right now in the Cobra meeting, what would you be urging Mrs May to do? Now, there's been a vigil held in Manchester this evening. It started at 6 o'clock. It's just finished, I think. And let's go over to LBC's reporter in Manchester, Rachel Venables. Rachel, good evening.
Good evening. Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there when you've described the shock and the anger that many people, if not every person I've spoken to here in Manchester today, has been telling me they feel, particularly because we know that it was a pop concert that was targeted. It would have been filled with screaming, happy, dancing children. Some of them left early as Ariana Grande came back on for an encore, and that's when the bomb went off in the foyer. People who were there described being blasted to the ground, nuts and bolts flying everywhere, people covered in blood, and as we now know, 22 people were killed and 59 injured, including 18-year-olds Georgina Calendar and Sadie Russo, who was just 8 years old. And throughout today, we've been hearing appeals, hearing from desperate parents and loved ones. I've been speaking to some myself, looking for their family, looking for the loved one who they waved off to go to a concert and who didn't contact them, didn't text them to say I'm safe after that bomb went off. And that's really been the focus of the people here in Manchester today, moving beyond this, coming together as a community, and the vigil certainly aimed to do that. It celebrated Manchester, particularly with a poem as well by Tony Walsh, which celebrated the suffragettes making tea and just northern grit, which had huge cheers from the crowd here, despite what's been a really sad 24 hours.
Yeah, there was lots of talk, Rachel, wasn't there, of sort of taxi drivers in Manchester and even some coming from Liverpool to help ferry people around because the train service had closed. And there's been a lot has been said about the spirit of Manchester in dealing with this. But can you tell us what the latest statements from the police are?
Well, the latest statements from the police have covered a number of things. First of all, passing their condolences on to the families, as we will always hear in these situations. Only a handful of those killed have been named, so we'll be hearing more from the police over the next few days on that. They also discussed 2 warrants which they carried out today, one in Whaley Range and one in Fallowfield as well, which saw a controlled explosion happening earlier today. A 23-year-old man was also arrested in connection with the attack, and police have also confirmed in the last few hours as well that the man suspected of carrying out the atrocity, in their words, has been named as 22-year-old Salman Abedi. Now, he's thought to have been born in the UK with Libyan origin, and it's thought that he died in the attack last night. He hasn't been officially named, but that's certainly the word coming from the police.
Yes, and so we don't know, as I understand it, whether this man was known to the police previously or not. Reports that I've read seem to vary on this.
That's very true. Reports have varied on that. Some people saying that he was known to the police, others being less sure. As always happens in a situation like this, police are very cagey. What we do know is that they said they knew the suspect's identity, or they said they thought they knew the suspect's identity pretty early on, and it took quite a few hours before they revealed that, partially because in that time that's when they carried out these 2 searches at these 2 addresses in Manchester. So they keep their cards very close to their chest, as you can understand, because they want to speak to friends, they want to speak to family, they don't want to give everything away.
Yeah. Rachel, thank you very much indeed. If any news breaks, please do come back to us. Meanwhile, that's been happening in Manchester, the vigil, which has just ended. In London, the Prime Minister is chairing a meeting of Cobra, and I've got with me Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. He's down in Westminster. What can you tell us, Theo?
I'm looking at a screen of number 10 Downing Street here in our Westminster studio, Nigel, and I've yet to see Theresa May walk through that door into committee briefing room A to chair the second meeting of Cobra, the government's emergencies committee. At that meeting will be the Home Secretary Amber Rudd, as well as police chiefs. We can also expect the Transport Secretary Chris Grayling and Michael Fallon to be there as well, and they will be discussing not just the police's response in Greater Manchester, but also, I'd imagine, the threat level as well. Currently it's at severe. Will they decide to raise it to critical? And then there are, Nigel, a series of high-profile sporting events here in London, namely the FA Cup final this weekend, and what measures can be put in place to assure visitors to those events that they're safe. We're talking about more armed police on the streets, and that's the initial response, but will anything else be expected as well?
I mean, in fact, we've been on severe, haven't we, now since 2014. So this is sort of perpetual state of fear, it would seem the government is under. Can you just briefly explain to the listeners what Cobra exactly is?
It's a meeting room. It's a meeting room, but it's where they convene all the top level intelligence people from MI5, MI6, GCHQ, as well as officials that might have a specific interest. So, for instance, when we had that hacking case into the NHS, that involved NHS officials. Now, clearly, in this case, as far as Department of Health officials will be concerned, that won't be necessary. Although I'm sure there'll be some advice as to the exact situation at those 8 Manchester hospitals. But you get the picture. People are brought in according to the expertise that are needed for a particular emergency. And obviously now the focus is on trying to find out who this man's associates are, who his friends are, where he may have got the materials for this explosive device from. This is, Nigel, different to the Westminster Bridge attack. It is different to the murder of Lee Rigby 4 years ago because it did involve a degree of planning. We're talking about reconnaissance. We're talking about finding those materials for that explosive device, and it will have required some support. And when you look at the types of raids being carried out by Greater Manchester Police, the specialist officers involved, the types of tactics used, they were going after particular individuals. They were not just pulling in associates, friends, relatives for questioning. They were pulling in people for interrogation. They need to get to the bottom of who may have helped this man so they can be brought to justice.
I'm sure I speak for everybody listening to say let's hope they do. And just briefly, Theo, what are the implications? I mean, there's never been, as I understand it, a terrorist attack that has taken place during a general election campaign. We had the murder of Joe Cox that took place in the referendum last year, but this has never happened before in a general election. How long do you think campaigning is going to be suspended for?
You're quite right to mention that's true. I think what we're going to see, and it was mentioned today that there'd be a suspension. It was said today there'd be a suspension of national campaigns. So Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, Paul Nuttall and Tim Farron will lay off the campaigning at a national level for the time being. I think tomorrow we'll start to see a bit of local campaigning, the delivering of leaflets, knocking of doors by a few candidates, and of course the main party leaders hadn't ruled that out. Friday is the day when we're expecting it to be stepped up again. But of course, Theresa May and the Conservative campaign has been very much about her personally.
Yes.
Is going to be in Brussels for NATO and then Sicily for the G7, and so she won't really be taking part in campaigning properly until Sunday. And we know that in actual fact the Conservative leader doesn't really like to campaign on Sunday. So in many ways it could be that we don't really see a proper resumption of the campaign until Monday.
Yeah. Theo, thank you ever so much indeed. Well, imagine that you're there at that Cobra meeting, which hasn't actually started, was supposed to start, but is about to start. Imagine you're going into that meeting. What do you want the government's response to be? What would you say to Theresa May needs to be done? Let me know. Call me on 0345 60 60 973. You can text me on 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC using the hashtag Farage and LBC. You can watch us and comment, of course, on LBC's Facebook page too. And I'm going to go first to Emma in Ealing. Emma, what do you think the government should do?
Hi, Nigel. Well, quite frankly, I want the government to clamp down on what's going on in the UK. First of all, I'd like to say that I integrate and I work with a lot of Muslims. I'm a teacher.
Yes.
And yes, of course, there's lots of lovely Muslims out there. They're wonderful people, fabulous. And they're not all terrorists. I don't think that at all. And they're not all extremists. However, I've watched many programs now there was one particular one that's really shocked me because I only watched it a couple of weeks ago, but it was aired apparently a couple of years ago on do you know Stacey Dooley? She did a documentary about her hometown, which is Luton.
Oh, that's right.
And she was there attending a march by Muslim people who were protesting about a woman who had been arrested. I'm not quite sure of the details of the arrest. And there were hundreds and hundreds of these Muslim people, and they were all attacking Stacey Dooley, saying that she was a disgrace for wearing this lovely long dress that she had on because she looked naked to them, and they were absolutely inciting hatred against British people.
So why would people living in what would have driven them, if what you say is absolutely true, what would have driven them to incite hatred? What's going wrong?
I don't know. I really don't know. It saddens me greatly. I know there's some people who would want to live here peacefully, but I don't know. But they've obviously come from countries that they're trying to get away from, so I would have thought they want to come here and live here and bring their children up in a very peaceful and wonderful environment. I mean, I think the UK for me is a wonderful country. We're incredibly tolerant.
Yeah, we have been, certainly.
I can't understand why these people can't embrace that. And they don't embrace that. They do not integrate. There's so many things we need to do. On that video, every female Muslim was completely covered up. You could not see her face. That is frightening for me.
Would that be your number one thing that needs to be changed, Emma?
Absolute. Ban the veil. I'd even go further than that. I would ban the headscarf for children under the age of 18. Because I think it's actually quite an awful thing to see. I see little kids in school, aged 5 and 6, wearing a headscarf. I kind of find it quite cruel.
Emma, you've made your point very clearly. Emma wants a ban on the veil, on the headscarf for children. If you disagree, get involved, let us know. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. The country is a sadder place today without any shadow of a doubt. The murder of 22 people, including children as young as the age of 8, has shocked people, horrified people, saddened people, and angered people too. But we've heard before our leaders telling us that they'll stand firm and they'll be resolute. But I'm asking you tonight, what do you want the government's response to be? What do you want them to actually do? If you were there at that Cobra meeting tonight with the Prime Minister, what would you be urging her to do? Edward in Northampton, put yourself in that room. What's the one thing you think needs to be done?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
It's the first time I've ever spoken to you.
Well, welcome. Welcome, but sadly on this very, very macabre subject of what happened last night.
Yes, it is. I think they should seriously bring back in a big way stop and search.
Yes.
Definitely. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that when we had it, which it was only a few ethnic minorities that complained about it, I'd have no problem being searched any time of the day or night, Nigel. No problem at all.
But if you're dealing, Edward, with something like knife crime in London, which apparently is at epidemic levels in some boroughs, so there are hundreds of people carrying illegal knives, I can see in that case why Stop and Search would find a lot of people with knives.
Yes.
But if you're dealing with one suicide bomber in a city the size of Manchester, is Stop and Search really... I mean, you really would be then, I think, would you not, looking for the needle in the haystack?
Well, yes, and what I've heard today from reports on LBC, that these people started queuing about 6 o'clock to go into a concert at 7:30. I mean, I would make sure that everyone's bag and everyone was searched going through those turnstiles.
Well, I think, Edward...
It takes 6 or 8 hours, Nigel.
Yeah, no. I think, Edward, to be fair to the venue, the reports that I read is there was security for people going into the building and their bags were searched. The problem is what happens outside. And this is exactly the same thing the authorities in Brussels came up with. That once you've gone through airport security, you've been metal checked, bag checked, patted down, asked to half undress and all the rest of it. But as you actually arrive at Brussels airport and drop people off, it is effectively a public space. And the problem with what happened last night was it happened in what was a public space. So, you know, I mean, I'm not pretending for one moment that dealing with this is easy. No. But what worries me, Edward, is why and where are people being radicalised? That's the bit that really gets me.
I mean, I heard today again on the news that trying to get into Windsor Castle, you're searched before you even get anywhere near the grounds.
Yeah, well, we may, Edward, we may be heading towards that. The danger is that in fact all we do is push the problem to another place. Edward, you've made the point. The police need more powers. They need to stop and search people and not be worried about being criticised for profiling by religion or age or sex or race or anything else. Edward, I thank you very much for your call. Brad in Stoke-on-Trent, what's the one thing you think needs to be done?
Hi, Nigel. Thank you for talking to me. I think there's a real problem. I think what we've got is we've got people being radicalised on things such as social media. You know, you've got young people that don't feel part of society and feel segregated and feel like they don't belong to anything, and that's why it's so easy for them to get radicalised through social media and websites. It's easy to go on and do a Google search and watch a few propaganda videos and end up with all these crazy ideas of going and doing these things. What is the one thing that we need to do? I don't think it's as simple as putting it down to one thing, if I'm honest with you.
No, I didn't say it was, Brad. I said, what's the one thing you would suggest? That was all.
Sorry. Yeah, I think the thing is, Nigel, is the one thing that I think that we need to do is we need to be a bit more close circuit. Like, this person was on the watch list. Now, I imagine that there's thousands and thousands of people on the watch list, but why are they getting forgotten about? Why is nothing being done about that? These people need to be monitored. We need to have people monitoring these people so that they are not able to sort this. But the problem is there's a lot of terrorists that are already over here in the UK. You know, I remember when the refugee crisis was happening, and potentially sort of still is, when the refugee crisis was happening, ISIS said themselves, we're going to send fighters onto boats. There was people throwing the passports in the sea, saying, yeah, I'm a refugee. You know, at the end of the day, the problem is that they've already been integrated into our society, and they're now being spread out across the country. And what we can't do anything about it. We're going to struggle so much to do anything about it whatsoever. And it's hard, you know, because as I say, these people who got killed were innocent young people.
Of course,
and that is the type of people that they target. They target the innocent.
So the internet, though, you think is potentially a really, really dangerous problem in all of this?
It's a breeding ground. It is a breeding ground. It's so easy to go into a Google search and find any ISIS propaganda, anything like that.
So should we, Brad? I'm just going to ask you this very simple question: should the government be, to whatever extent it can, somehow regulating the internet?
I would like to see that done, and I don't know how it would be done. But to be fair, there needs to be something more. There needs to be something more done. It's easy, you know. These people are getting these ideas from
the internet. Brad, thank you. You've made your point beautifully and clearly, and I get on text this cobra should change its name to Bambi because it does nothing, and if they don't this time, then we the people will have to. says Steve from Sutton. You cannot expect security services to catch everyone, but staffing needs to be reviewed and, if requested, increased. But mindful that our lives cannot change, says Cindy. Cindy, I have a feeling that our lives in many ways have changed already. Just catch an aeroplane flight and you realise that our lives have changed as a result of the threat. And here's the one that I was expecting and I've been seeing today. The government needs to round up and isolate the 3,500 jihadis that were allowed back into the country. Well, I don't think 3,500 jihadis were allowed back into the country. I understand the number is estimated to be between 500 and 1,000 people, British passport holders, who've left these shores and gone to fight for ISIS in Syria and then come back into the country. And yes, they are dangerous people. They've been brutalised and they've learnt to make bombs and to do all sorts of things. And I would love to think we could stop any of them coming back into our country and, frankly, in my view, take their passports away. But the 3,500 number, it's 3,500 suspected jihadi terrorists that are living in the United Kingdom. And there is a question here. Do the security services have sufficient resources to monitor 3,500 people? And I've seen even quite well-known national newspaper commentators today suggesting that we should round up the 3,500, a sort of, I don't know, what would it be, a British Guantanamo Bay or whatever it is. I have a feeling that that won't happen. I think it probably in any country in the European time zone perhaps has too much of the shades of the 1930s about it. But make no mistake, listeners, there are quite a lot of people out there today suggesting that's what we need to do. I'm going to ask Darren in Barnsley. Darren, good evening. What on earth do we need to do? What do we need to do, Darren? What would you do? What would you tell the Prime Minister, Darren?
I've just sat and listened to your callers and what you've just said.
Yep.
And you've basically taken words out of my mouth, if I'm quite honest.
That's all right. That's all right.
So, yeah, this is thing. You could do a Trump thing and ban all Muslims coming into the country, but then you've got to...
Well, Trump, to be fair, Trump, to be fair, wasn't actually doing that. But
you've got the problem. You've got the problem. See, the thing is, you've got Muslims, and then you've got people who are extremists, and that is the issue. You've got the issue. The issue is you've already got the extremists here. Muslims is probably the wrong word to say, but somebody needs to stand up and tackle the problem within. So firstly, what I do is anybody with terrorist links or known terrorists, that is the words what I can't comprehend. When something like this happens and then somebody turns around and it comes on radio, comes on news that there were known terrorists. They were known. So why on earth has this been allowed to happen? So what needs to happen is, number one, if you've links, or if you've been to Syria and you've come back and they've got an idea, they need to do exactly what you've just said.
So somebody, if somebody, Darren, living in a community not too far from you, had been out to Syria and come back, do you think their own parents or their own brothers and sisters should report them to the authorities?
Well, that depends, because if they've got family in Syria, it's like anything. You can lock paedophiles up, can't you? If somebody's looking at wrong things on the internet, they know somehow. So if somebody's looking at, it's like grooming, isn't it? You get the kids. So if you ban Muslims coming in, you try and stop the Islamists.
And the other problem, Darren, is there are 3 million people of Muslim faith living in this country. If we were seen to act in too heavy-handed way, or if we were seen to presume people were guilty before we thought they were innocent, we might actually radicalise even more people, Darren.
Exactly. And I think the only party is the Muslims themselves.
They need to sort it out. Darren, you've made the point beautifully. I thank you. In a moment, we're going to have Sebastian Gorka straight from the White House talking to us about Trump's speech, talking to us about Trump and the White House's plan for us all across the world, including Muslim states, needing to work together to deal with this evil. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. Well, in the wake of the horror in Manchester last night, there's been condemnation of what happened, not just from British political leaders, but also from leaders all around the world. And this is what President Trump had to say.
I won't call them monsters. because they would like that term. I will call them from now on losers, because that's what they are. They're losers.
I like that phrase, losers. Well, I'm pleased to say that joining me now, I've got Seb Gorka. He is the Deputy Assistant to President Trump. He's also the author of a book called Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War. And I have a signed copy of that book, Seb, and it filled me with some optimism, I have to say, that things can be done. Welcome, Seb, to the programme.
Thank you. That was the point of the book. We defeated the West. Britain, America defeated the Nazis. We defeated the Soviet Union. We are facing totalitarians again. This time it's global jihadists. And together we will defeat them as well.
Well, I think that's the message that the people of this country need to hear today. I was very interested that shortly after we heard that this bomb had gone off in Manchester last night, but without knowing who the perpetrator was, you put out on Twitter that the Manchester explosion happens on the 4th anniversary of the murder of Fusilier Lee Rigby. Dates matter to jihadi terrorists. Can you just explain that to us, please?
Yeah, so terrorism in general, but specifically jihadi terrorism, isn't just about death, destruction, and murder. It's about symbolism. Look at 9/11. Look at the event that happened yesterday. Look at the symbolism. September the 11th was a very important date in Islamic history. Yesterday was the 4th anniversary of the brutal murder of Fusilier Rigby. And that's not a coincidence. These things matter. They take a lot of planning. 9/11 took years of planning. Yesterday's attack probably took at least months of planning. And they pick these days specifically to send their message of fear. But as the president said yesterday, we don't call them monsters because we're not afraid of them.
Yes.
These are losers, and we will crush them, Nigel.
I thought that was a really clever word the president used because, as I understand it, the people that commit these barbarous acts believe it makes them great people and they'll be immortalised in history. So I guess that's why Trump used that word loser, yeah?
Yeah, because, a monster is something you're afraid of. A monster is powerful.
Yes.
These people aren't powerful. Killing 8-year-old girls, children at a concert, they're cowards, and they should be called out for being losers. They're part of a losing death cult that we will annihilate, thanks to, the leadership that we're seeing coming out of both the UK and the United States.
Well, I have to say, talking of leadership, I did think that Trump's speech that he gave in Riyadh the other day was extraordinary. And in particular, the phrase that he used when he said to these leaders, drive them out, drive the extremists out of your places of worship. Do you think that the Trump visit, that Trump saying, look, I'm not against all of you, whatever was said in the campaign was said, I want to work with you, I want to beat the bad guys. Do you see any signs of hope coming from this trip, that we can perhaps get some genuine cooperation with parts of the Muslim world to try and beat this evil?
Absolutely, Nigel. So, think about what happened just a few days ago. It truly was a Churchillian moment. So we had the President of the United States stand in front of the leaders of more than 50 Arab and Muslim nations and say, look, you have a problem. You have to clean your house. You have to get the extremists out of your places of worship, out of your communities. And what else did he say? As if we were back, as if it was the battle of the forces arrayed against us, were as if we were back on the beaches of Normandy. What did he say? He said, this is a battle between good and evil. That's the moral clarity that we required in World War II, that we required at the height of the Cold War, and that is the only way we're going to win. And we're seeing amazing things coming out of Egypt and Jordan and hopefully elsewhere that will make victory possible.
So you don't think that there'll be a response from some countries that maybe the US president is interfering a bit too much, is moralising, lecturing a bit too much?
Look, there's so much misconception. I don't even. The president calls it fake news. As the brunt of some of that fake news in the last 17 weeks, I've just come to the conclusion it's propaganda. It's the same with Brexit. The amount of lies that was spun is just, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Well, I won't disagree with you on that point, that's for certain. Can I ask you, Seb, just one last, but perhaps most important question that I want to ask you. and that is that there are people listening to this show tonight who are shocked, horrified, upset, angry, all those mixtures of emotions. And as I'm talking to you, the Prime Minister, is in a secret meeting, in a Cobra meeting, deciding what the next steps are. And I do feel that we've almost had enough of being told after each of these attacks that we condemn what has happened. I think the British people now, and the people across Europe, want some action. If you were in that meeting, what would you advise our Prime Minister to do right away?
Exactly what we've been doing here for the last 4 months, Nigel. First things first, no more political correctness, no more censorship. We talk about the enemy as who they truly are and the ideology that drives them, global jihadism. Second, we empower those people who need to be empowered, especially amongst the Muslim community, especially amongst our Muslim allies, the people who are pushing back already, but who we don't help. Because they're talking about religious themes or because it's not politically correct. And the last thing, this isn't really a war about bombs and bullets. That's part of it. It's about intelligence. Just like with the IRA, we have to find these people before they strap on the vest, before they go kinetic. Then we will win. So reinforcing human intelligence capabilities.
Seb, I can't thank you enough for coming on the programme and for being so positive and uplifting on what is a black day. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we were very fortunate, I think, to get Seb Gorka there, who has studied this subject for years. And so often, when you hear people, when you hear the critical voices, when you hear those that condemn the government and say they've got everything wrong, so often it's a negative message. And what is fascinating about Seb Gorka, and you heard it there, is it's a positive message. He says in the last few months, this is what Trump is doing in America. Now, I don't know whether you agree with those steps or you disagree with those steps, but let me know what you think the Prime Minister should do and what you think of what Team Trump is trying to do on a global scale and whether they've got this right or whether they've got this wrong. The number to call 0345 6060 973, and I'm going to go to Rawa in Hampstead. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, what would you do?
I'm not a fan of Trump at all. I thought his speech was very honest from a Western, politician. Just basically saying, look, our interests, our American interests, obviously, and where those align with yours, let's work together. And it was quite refreshing, and I think it was quite good to hear someone saying, I'm not really interested in regime change. We just don't want Americans to be attacked.
As you were, as a non-Trump fan, did you think there was just something perhaps of the global statesman about him in that speech?
I'm not sure I'm that generous, Nigel.
Okay, all right.
But, I thought it was very honest, and I think a lot of politicians go around the world talking about how important democracy is while selling lots of arms to Saudi. Yep. And he went there and said, actually, I'm not so bothered about how you run your country, and I'm going to sell all those arms to Saudi. That's a lot more honest.
Yep, no, I get that, absolutely. So put yourself, Rawa, you are now in the meeting with the Prime Minister. What is the one thing you want to see happen?
I think what we're doing isn't working. I don't think the solution is more monitoring, more, crushing down on the Muslim community. I think that for whatever reason, we've got people who are turning out to be mad, nutter terrorists, and it is disgusting and it's horrible. This is a British guy. I don't link it with the refugee crisis. He was born here. He's our problem.
Yes, his parents were. His parents were refugees. But yes, he was born here. He was born here, and we think he may have visited Libya. But we basically think he was radicalised here. So we've talked about the internet, but there are other problems too, aren't there, Rawa? I mean, for example, we've seen examples of schools. Where Austin has said, look, something's got to stop here. And even prisons, because the guy that drove into those people on Westminster Bridge had been radicalised in a prison in Norfolk. So there is a lot to do, isn't there?
I think the prison system is a big issue. Quite a lot of terrorists across Europe and Britain have been through the prison system. One of the interesting things is our prison system doesn't work. I think the recidivism rates are nearer to 80%. You've got countries like Norway where they're below 10%. And what Norway does differently is after when you've committed a horrific crime, the first person you see is a doctor. Now, it's not that you're going to avoid sentencing or avoid jail, but I think the Norwegians understand that there is a vested interest for all of society for people to not come back out with better skills, maybe a bit of jihadism under their belt, and feeling really angry with the system. You know, prison's expensive, and it's particularly expensive. People are going in and out of it.
Robert,
I think I would look at the Danish models, and I would look at Scandinavian
You are
models.
very right.
I'm not hug a hoodie, but what we're doing is not working.
You've made a very powerful point. It's not working, and prisons are a real problem, and I thank you for your call. In a minute, we're going to look specifically at radicalisation in prisons with the help of an expert. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45. Whilst we're sad, angry and horrified at what happened in Manchester yesterday, we're trying, in this programme, to find some solutions. We're trying, actually, to find some advice for the Prime Minister, because I think what people are feeling is that we get the words every time something horrid happens, but what we don't get is enough action. Now, my next guest this evening is Hanif Kadir, who is the CEO of the Active Change Foundation and author of Preventing and Countering Extremism and Terrorist Recruitment. Hanif, good evening to you and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks for having me on.
Not a bit.
Sad day, eh?
Very sad indeed. I say we're sad, but we are trying to be positive. We're trying here not to just throw our arms up in the air and despair. We're trying to look for possible ways forward. I just would like you to tell me very quickly what the Active Change Foundation attempts to do.
We started it off in 2003 to tackle the problem of radicalisation and extremism within our communities. In 2003, when everybody thought I was dreaming and I was imagining things, and look at now, 15 years on, we are still fighting the same problem. So the Active Change Foundation works with young people and communities right across the board.
Yes.
Outreach and engagement, we go right into the communities and we engage with individuals of concern.
Why? I mean, clearly we've got the internet, we've got schools, we've got prisons. I mean, with all these years of experience looking at this, is there any one area in particular that really worries you the most?
Every single area worries me the most, Nigel. Right. I mean, we're talking about internet now, but let's go back 10 years. 7/7, they weren't radicalised on the internet. So radicalisation happens in our communities at every level. Institutions are vulnerable to radicalisation. Prisons, we know that is a fact. The problem that we've got here is that there's not enough being done effectively by organisations that are at a grassroots level to tackle the problem. And the reason that is because we are led by a government that's become so risk-averse that if we want to tackle this risky problem, we have to take certain risks. And if organisations like us are not allowed to take those risks, the problem's only going to get worse.
You will obviously have looked at Theresa May, who was Home Secretary for 6 years, and does she understand the depth of this problem? Is she the right person to tackle this?
64 million dollar question, Nigel. How do you want me to answer that? The truth or the alternative fact?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess the truth might be handy.
Absolutely. The truth is, I don't think she does understand the depth of this problem. And I've worked very closely with Theresa May and her team. And my conclusions will remain with me. But I think that, in all honesty, I don't think the whole team fully understand the level and the depth of this problem. If they did, they would allow us to continue at the pace and the level that we have been doing for so long. For nearly 15 years, we were championed by the Home Office. We were doing successful work. But there's a lot of organisations that are out there engaging with communities. Effective outreach is not happening. Effective understanding of the problem and expertise where it's needed is non-existent.
And if you were sitting in that COBRA meeting now, what would you say needs to be done right away?
I would say what I've said before. Let's do what they are doing, tapping into the human resource, and they are changing them to become monsters and losers, like Donald Trump said. Mm-hmm. We can tap into that human resource and turn them into assets. We have to be able to take risks because it's risky business. We can stop this problem. I am confident. I have demonstrated how we can stop this problem. We need to be able to do the work that needs to be done and not be dictated to by central government.
OK, but it's not easy for central government to know who to trust to do this, is it?
Exactly. But then, since 2003, we've helped shape the Prevent agenda. The Prevent agenda, let me tell you one thing. From my perspective and from the work we've done, it's the best thing since sliced bread. It hasn't been communicated effectively to the communities. The communities have lost trust in the government because we haven't demonstrated the effectiveness of it. Now, the government wants to do that only at a time when people have become so suspicious of Prevent, they don't trust it. So any organisation that's associated with government is no longer trustable by communities.
So really, your message is that there is great work we have done. There's a lot more great work we could do. We just need to empower the right people to go out there and do it. So basically, it's still a positive message, but one tinged with a bit of frustration, Hanif.
Of course. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind, and the team that I work with, the people I've met, police officers, security officers, civil servants even, that we can tackle and we can stop this problem. It lies with the risk averseness at a ministerial level and not allowing organisations like us across the country to get on with the damn job.
And one last little question for you. Who out there amongst the British-born Muslims, what type of person is the most vulnerable to being radicalised?
Everybody's vulnerable to being radicalised.
Wow. Hanif, I thank you very much indeed for your call, and well done for all these years you've been doing your utmost to fight this horrible, horrible disease, and that's what I'm going to call it, because it is like a very nasty, unpleasant disease. And on Twitter, I get, we should act on intelligence before the killing, not after. Yeah, actually, the authorities tell us they have stopped 13 major terrorist attempts over the course of the last few years. And do you know what? For once, I do actually believe the authorities. Every person who's been to Syria and fighting for ISIS and returns to the UK should either be locked up or deported. End of. So I'm getting quite a lot of messages through like that. It should be a straight, heavy nicking for anyone that puts up anything to do with ISIS online, the same as it is for child abuse. Interesting, the internet has provoked a lot of response. Gareth in Liverpool, tell me, what do you think needs to happen?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I don't know. I've got a bit of a dog in this fight. My business partner's wife was stood feet away from the blast. She's currently in intensive care.
Oh gosh.
So my feelings are running high at the moment. But the problem is there's an all too familiar pattern emerging with the perpetrator of this. It's come out. He follows the same religion as every other terrorist attack we have in this country. It's come out that, and they're saying the same. He was a lone wolf. He was this, that, the other. But the security services in this country constantly monitor 3,000 people. And every time there's a terrorist attack, it comes out they were on that list. They were known to the services. They're spending £9 billion a year to watch these 3,000 people, only for when one of them strikes to go, hey, we were watching them. Well, do something about them. We're going to need, it's extreme times. We need extreme measures. I've never known, not in the recent decades, known a terrorist attack to hit so close to home. The last one probably being, sadly, Manchester again, 1996.
The Arndale Centre.
With the Arndale Centre.
Yeah. But Gareth, what are you suggesting? Look, there are 3,500 people on this list that we've talked about. What do you really think? I mean, if you were sitting with Theresa May now, what would you recommend that she does with these 3,500 people?
Honestly?
Yeah.
Open a camp like Guantanamo Bay and throw them all in. They're all potential bombers. They've all got the potential to do this. So they should be straight away thrown in a camp or a prison or something where they can say, right, we need to monitor you. We need to find out what chances are you're going to do this. Because it's not just the 3,000. There's also the Inspire magazine. I'm sure you've heard of that.
I have, yeah.
Which is a terrorist manifesto, which tells people how to kill efficiently. 50,000 people in the UK downloaded that last year. So let's assume that all those 3,000 downloaded that. There's 50,000 potential lone wolves out there now.
Well, I'd be careful about that because we're exposed to all sorts of stuff on the internet without being changed. Gareth, what you've said is very strong. You are not alone in saying it today. As I say, it worries me. It shades of the 1930s. That's the bit that gets me. But lastly, and most importantly, how is your business partner making? How's he getting through this? A wife in intensive care.
I haven't spoken to him. I know she was in theatre until lunchtime. She's got severe trauma, life-changing injuries. So he's the information we've got is from.
Okay. Well, we wish her well, Gareth, and we thank you for the call. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. And we continue this conversation after the news, the dreadful news from Manchester.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening. Well, after the tragedy and the sadness, today has been a very odd, a very strange day. A day after which the Prime Minister has raised the threat level from critical to severe, and we have the army. We have soldiers in military uniform in Downing Street. We're told that major sporting fixtures will see armed soldiers. And let me tell you something really very odd about today and about the last 48 hours. That we've learnt more about Salman Abedi. In fact, we've learnt his name. We've learnt the fact that he went to Syria. We've learnt more about his family from American intelligence and from French intelligence than we have from British intelligence. And just in the last hour or so, the New York Times have published a whole series of pictures, even showing the actual bomb itself. Now, I was asking this question this morning on Twitter. I was accused by a Tory MP of threatening national security. And I do understand that there's been a big network today in Manchester, in London. There are several arrests that have taken place. They're looking for the links that Abedi had with other people, and clearly they're finding them, which is good. But if all this stuff is absolutely secret and critical and should not be in the public domain because otherwise it might hinder arresting other people, why on earth are they telling the French and German intelligence services all this information who are now releasing it to us? That I find difficult to understand. What we also get is from the Didsbury Mosque, from some of the preachers at the Didsbury Mosque, telling us that Abedi really scared them. He was talking about suicide bombing being a noble route out. Indeed, some of his neighbours said the same thing, that this young man was displaying increasingly bad, worrying behaviour. So he was known to the authorities. He'd befriended somebody on Mossad who was known as a recruiting officer for ISIS. The authorities knew who this man was, and yet he wasn't on the list. Yep, there is a list. There is a list of nearly 3,500 people who are suspected potential terrorists living in this country. And yet this man, despite all we knew about him, wasn't on it. So one wonders how big the list in reality really is. Perhaps it really is 10,000. I don't know. But for the purposes of this discussion, given that we know the identities of 3,500 people who've got links to radical Islam, who've got links to ISIS, who've got links to extremism, and who pose a threat to our way of life, what should we do with those 3,500 known jihadis in this country already? I want to know from you what you think we ought to do in the face of something that clearly is a very grave situation indeed. Let me know what you think. Call me on 0345 60 60 973. Text me on 84850. You can tweet me at LBC, not forgetting the hashtag Farage and LBC. And of course, you can watch the show live by going to LBC's Facebook page. Now, Mohammed in Birmingham, I'm going to you as my first caller. There are nearly 3,500 people that we absolutely know have links to really bad people across the world. How on earth should we deal with them?
Hi, can I just say, right, in order to understand the problem that we have here, is to speak to apostates of Islam if you want to truly understand what's happening. I am an apostate of Islam.
Are you? Okay.
Now,
so have you given up on Islam or converted to Christianity? I mean, what's your situation?
I initially turned away from Islam because I know what it teaches. And then, along the way, I found Christ. So it wasn't a switch from one to the other. I just turned away from Islam because I did not accept the things that were in there.
Is that, Mohammed, I'm sorry to stop you, because I know you've got a story to tell, and I want to hear it. Just very quickly, is that because of the religion itself, in your view, or the way in which it was interpreted and taught to you?
Now, if you speak to anyone that's turned away from Islam, they will tell you exactly the same why we have turned away. Millions are turning away from it because the ideology itself is offensive. It's not. You will not find the word love in the Quran, right? As you know, Muhammad, when he first started, he was a peaceful person, right?
Yes.
But as soon as he went strong, he had an army, he then went on the offensive. That is a problem. The Quran itself is prescriptive. You have to obey it. That's the problem. And you cannot, you can't change it. You can't. And this is a problem. The other problem is, right, when the British allowed these people into Britain, what happens is this. A Pakistani community has got anti-British attitudes anyway. When I speak to them, they don't know that I am an apostate. When I engage with them and I ask them about the questions of the French attacks, they say that wasn't us, that was MI5. The attacks in the tube attacks, that wasn't us, that was MI5. So you got this deluded.
This is rather like Mohammed, the 9/11 stuff, isn't it? I'm told that some of the extreme preaching tells people that 9/11 wasn't radical Islam. It was actually the American state that conducted this stuff.
Or the Jews.
Or the Jews, yeah.
Now, here's the thing, right? When they allow these people into our community that is already here, because the British authorities think we can put these people into the Islamic communities that are already here because they will feel at home. That's a big mistake, because what's happening is when these people come into the Islamic communities here, the Islamic communities here are telling them the reason that your country is in a mess is because of the British.
Mohammed, I do understand where we started with this, and I've had this debate with callers in the past, and you know, I have studied this a little bit, and I get that the later bits of the Quran are pretty insightful in many ways. But equally, you could argue there are parts of the Old Testament that actually say things about homosexuals, etc., that we might find very difficult to live with, well, impossible to live with under the law today. Interesting. But, Mohammed, let me just ask you something. You clearly believe that the teachings of this book are bad and wrong, and you've turned away from it. And yet, am I not right in saying that the vast majority of people of practicing Muslim faith living in Britain today are peaceful and want to be British and part of our community?
I will agree with you on the first point. A majority of them are peaceful because they do not strictly follow, their prophet. Now, when you speak about Britishness, they are not the British. They swear their allegiance to the country where their parents are from. They're not proud to be British. When we went into war with Argentina and a British ship was attacked and sunk, my community was cheering.
This was, I mean, famously in the 1980s, and it provoked a huge uproar. Norman Tebbit called this the cricket test, didn't he? That you've come to this country, you've settled here, you may have taken nationality, but who do you support when England plays a team from the subcontinent at cricket? And what you're saying, Mohammed, is that peaceful and non-peaceful actually owe their allegiance to the countries of their birth or their parents' birth rather than this country.
Absolutely. Can I also say, here's an interesting point, right? There are approximately 85 Islamic people staying at Manchester. Now, they had a visual, right, yesterday. I hardly saw anybody from my community there. And that speaks a lot. And not only that, right, extremism at all levels has to be tackled, even for us as well, because 3 of my friends were almost killed for turning away from Islam.
8 armed officers eventually had to help a friend of mine from Bradford to leave his home because he was almost killed outside his home.
I do get the point, Mohammed, you make about apostasy, and I understand that if your neighbours, if they were of a more extreme mindset, may well make your life impossible. I understand that. But, Mohammed, can I just return, and thank you for saying the things that you've said. Can I just return to the sort of main point of my debate tonight, that we have nearly 3,500 known jihadis in this country who we're scared are potential terrorists. What do you think, Mohammed, the UK authorities should do to them?
Well, I mean, here's a prime example of what happened on a Monday night. The police were alerted on 2 occasions that this man was an extremist. He was dangerous.
I know.
And that just proves a point that the police, the authorities, do not understand the threat.
Mohammed, the fact that the preacher at the mosque and neighbours and other people said this guy was showing some really pretty extreme forms of behaviour, and yet he still wasn't on the list of nearly 3,500, that worries me. But let me ask you again. There are nearly 3,500 people that the authorities in this country think are capable of committing acts of terror. Doesn't mean they all will, but their links and associations and their behaviour and their online activity says they may commit horrendous acts. What do we do, Mohammed? You know, as a decent society that believes in the rule of law, what should we do?
We can either stand idle. The authorities can either stand idle,
or
a parliament can either stand idle and allow another attack to happen, or they can change a law that will make it easier to throw these people out of this country.
All right, Mohammed, listen, I thank you. We've had a very lengthy conversation. I'm fascinated by a lot of what you've got to say. Adam in Reading, what should we do? How do you view these 3,500 known jihadis?
Hi, Nigel. I'm a convert to Islam. I've been a Muslim for 10 years.
Yes.
Massive fan of yours. Thank you for your help in getting us out of the EU. What we should do with these 3,000 is they should be deported. We've got this 0.7 aid budget. What we use the aid budget for is buying up influence in the world. We can say, look, Libya, if you don't take all of these people, all of these extremists, if you don't take them, you're not getting a single penny of aid. And we can use,
I don't think, Adam, that's how David Cameron intended the 0.7% to be used. But Adam, look, if people have come into this country in the last few years from Libya, for argument's sake, and they're not conforming or refusing to get on with our way of life, I would accept we can deport them. But what do you do about someone like Salman Abedi, who is born in Manchester, who has a British passport? Where do you deport him to?
Libya.
but hang on, he's British.
No. But it doesn't matter, Like he's from a Libyan background. They're all Wahhabist, Salafist.
Hang on. We can't just do broad brushstroke. I mean, you're a convert to Islam, and here you are. You're sounding like the English Defence League on this.
Well, this is the thing. If we don't look, okay, all other Muslims are pretty much all right. You're not getting these issues from Sufis and Shiites and moderate Sunnis and stuff. It's all Wahhabis and Salafists. People don't understand this. It's Wahhabis and Salafists every single time. So, it's really simple. We need to start deporting these people. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a frigging race war. I hang out with Muslims all the time. I know the communities. I know how it works out, and I can see where it's heading. All these liberals don't know where it's freaking going.
Right. So Adam, your point is it's certain strands of Islam that we have the problem with. The rest, people like you, we have no problem with at all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, find somebody who isn't a Wahhabist or Salafist that's done any of this. It's always Wahhabist, Salafist.
Well, Adam, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that sentence. I'm not going to say anything myself. Adam has challenged you there. Can somebody please answer that question? If you're not a Wahhabist or a Salafist, do you pose any threat to this country at all? Adam, thank you. So, if Abedi had become a threat to this country, what on earth should we do with the 3,500 known jihadis in the UK already? Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:16. I tried last night, in the light of the absolute horror from Manchester, to have a show where we'd reach some positive conclusions about how we could stop radicalisation happening in our schools and prisons elsewhere. We took some advice from President Trump's advisor on these things as to how they're dealing with it in America. But I want to say something tonight that maybe is a little bit depressing. I've said already that there are nearly 3,500 known jihadists, people on a suspect terror list in the UK already. Andrew Parker, who's the Director General of MI5, said there are at least 3,000 committed jihadists in the country, and they are just the ones we know about. The real number could be anything between 6,000 and 10,000. Now, clearly, Salman Abedi was one of those, wasn't he? He wasn't. He's not included in a list that was considered to be absolutely hardcore, and just as worrying that it is known that at least 400 people have gone from the UK to Syria to fight from ISIS. Now, I say 400. Some reports say it could be 400 from Manchester alone. I don't know, but I'll stick with a lower figure. But of the hundreds that have gone to Syria and returned to the UK, only 54 have been prosecuted and a further 30 are facing charges. And there's one person that I really do want to direct a simple question to. She was the longest-serving Home Secretary for 150 years. Her name is Theresa May. And I want to know, why did we not either take the passports away from these 3,500 people, or take their passports away when they attempted to get back into the country? What have we done? I want to know this. What have we done to stop people who've been and fought in brutal war zones, who've learnt how to make bombs? What have we done to stop them coming back into our communities? Because from what I can see, it is very little indeed. I get on text, Nigel, great to listen to your show. I believe the 3,500 people need to be incarcerated or deported immediately. It can and should be done. We had some of that last night as well. I also get certain states in Germany are deporting people and go back 2 generations to their grandparents' countries. If they can, why can't we? Asks Anne in Basingstoke. Yeah, Anne, I heard the Merkel government saying this. There's an election coming up, Anne. They're not actually doing it. They let in over 1 million people in 1 year, and as a means of trying to quieten down a public that are angry with them, they said this is what they do. They're not actually doing it. Nigel, the reality that is very concerning is these perpetrators are now second generation or more. The only way is to adopt a more Australian approach, says David in Birmingham. Well, the Australian approach, David, would be you're careful about who comes in. And it is worth noting, it really is worth noting, that Abedi's parents came to the United Kingdom as opponents of Gaddafi, claiming political refuge. Was the reason they claimed political refuge that they were, in fact, jihadi extremists? I don't yet quite know the answer to that question. But if indeed the reason they claim refugee status here is because they were extreme jihadists, and that actually Gaddafi, whatever his faults may have been, was trying to run a secular country, I would then suggest we got to rethink our refugee policy in its entirety. Now, please, anybody out there with any knowledge of what was happening 20, 25 years ago in terms of refugee policy, come and tell me that I'm wrong. I'm not convinced I'm right, but you know what? I may be. Leon in Brighton. I'm being told by some people, Leon, that we should round everybody up and put them in internment camps. And I'm really worried that if we do that, it's shades of the 1930s, or even actually shades of what we did in Northern Ireland from time to time, to make the situation, as I see it, worse, not better. Leon, what do you think?
It's a bit high, Nick, first of all. Sorry, Nick, totally forgive me. The bottom line is this. Look, I'll be honest about it. Everybody's talking about, what we're seeing and what's going on, and it's hideous, it's awful, it's terrible. My heart bleeds for all the families, for everybody that's lost somebody, but there is a solution here that nobody really seems to be talking about.
Will you tell us what it is, please?
I'm going to share it with everybody, and I'll tell you what it is.
we need to look to, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but reformation. There needs to be reform within the Quran itself. Now, to be honest with you, there are a couple of leading political activists, one by the name of Herbst Ali.
I know. Yeah.
These are Muslim women, and they are speaking out about various aspects of Islam at the moment and what needs to change within it. To me, I'm looking at it in very simple terms. Of course, it wouldn't be simple to implement it, or even to get the Saudis, because they have founders' privilege, to actually agree to reinterpret the whole area of martyrdom, in the Quran. But if that's taken out, then there's no actual justification for committing murder in the name of the faith.
So we need to have a reformation that takes place within the religion of Islam. That would need, Leon, the leaders of all the different strains of Islam to accept there was a problem and to have a sort of international conference to do it. I actually think you're right in many, many ways. I think you are right. But a previous caller made the point that the Wahhabis and the Salafists are the real problem. Would they agree to do this?
Well, probably not. I mean, looking at the ideology they're following at the moment, there's no two ways about it. They won't. The bottom line is, and this is something that a lot of Muslims will agree with, is that they believe that, their doctrine is the final word of God. Now, I don't want to get sort of too much into the history. Islam evolved. The whole Quran sort of evolved over a period of a couple of hundred years. Now, the fact is, Sunnas were what became sort of the doctrine of the Quran itself. And there was debate amongst the elders at the time about which Sunnas should effectively be in the Quran and those that shouldn't. Now, there shouldn't be any debate about that if that's the final word.
Well, Leon, you're right. There are lots of strains. I mean, I know the Ahmadiyya Muslims in the United Kingdom very, very well. They've been to visit me in Brussels. I've been to visit them here. And they are absolutely pro-integrationist and pose absolutely no threat to this country at all, and they're friends of mine. Leon, it's complex because there are so many different strains of Islam. But your basic point that the religion needs to have a reformation, needs to have a public debate with itself about what's going wrong, I completely understand and take. Mahmood in Putney, what on earth do we do with these nearly 3,500 people?
Well, I think that if the due process, if they're subject to the due process of law, then if they're demonstrated to be a threat to the country, then absolutely they should be deported. I just wanted to say there's a previous caller, Muhammad, who said that he was a Christian, he converted from this dreadful religion, Islam. And he made all sorts of comments about Islam that weren't really challenged properly. I'm a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Are you? Okay. Well, I've literally just mentioned
it. I know. Yeah, I heard.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, what I would say is, I mean, you talk about reformation within Islam. I mean, that's something that has already happened. I mean, and when you say reformation, when Muhammad came, I mean, this idea that somehow, he came with the sword and, there was two phases to his life, one when he was peaceful and the other when he was warlike, is absolute tosh. And this idea that peace isn't mentioned in the Quran, well, Islam actually means peace, as your listeners well know. But the thing is that what's happened actually is that these Wahhabists that you're talking about, and these terrorists, they've taken certain verses of the Quran completely out of context, and those verses that relate to war only relate to defensive war. And they've taken them in a completely different context, and they're abetted by certain people who are Christians and whatever, who want to attack the religion.
You are not the first person to tell me that these are wild misinterpretations, that what was seen to be defensive is taken to be offensive. I've heard this before. But would you not accept there must be a problem within the religion if certain people choose to take that interpretation?
Well, I would say that there's a problem with the adherents of the religion, not the religion itself.
Okay.
I mean, because what I would say to you is, I mean, if you look back to Islam in Spain, Islam reached the shores of Europe in Spain, and that was a beacon of light for the entirety of Europe, which led to the Reformation and the Renaissance in Europe. When Europe was in the Dark Ages. So Islam, is a force for good and for knowledge and for enlightenment.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's going through a medieval phase in certain parts of the world, like Saudi Arabia. All countries that are supported by us, as in terms of arms deals and all sorts of things. We support the Saudis.
Mahmood, just tell me, because I mean I know the Amadeus. Let's just cheer a few people up who are listening to this and feeling very depressed. Just tell me that as a Muslim you are committed to integration, to being British, and to driving out the bad guys.
But more than that, we want to make a positive contribution to any country in which we settle, and we abhor these acts of terror, and we want to actually be the agents for change, so that within the religion we actually provide the theological arguments against these people.
I love it.
We're the only people
Mahmood, that's the best phone call I possibly could have had. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. This bomber, this monster, this loser, as President Trump called him. And actually, no, tell you what, let's keep using the word loser, because that's what these people are. He was known to the authorities. He had worried people at the Didsbury Mosque. He'd worried his neighbours. And yet, despite many of the things he said, he still wasn't on the list of nearly 3,500 people who are suspected jihadi terrorists in this country. And I'm asking you, what on earth should we do with them? And Mariana says to me on Facebook, anyone on a watch list for terrorism who goes to Syria to a training camp is not going on holiday. These people should have their passports confiscated on re-entry back into Britain. Mariana, I agree entirely. I also get David Essex says, anyone, regardless of religion, who breaks the law should feel the full weight of it, including internment, with reasonable proof. Similarly, anyone, regardless of religion, who does break the law, who deserves its protection. Yeah, Dave, that's fine. But is internment the way forward? And I'm just thinking, historically, and by the way, I'm not drawing any direct comparisons between Irish nationalism 100 years ago and extreme jihadism today. But isn't it interesting that in 1916 we get the Dublin Uprising? We get nationalists in Ireland who want Ireland to break away from Great Britain as it then was. And there's an uprising. What's interesting is they only had minority support in the island of Ireland. And yet, what did the Brits do? What did the British government do in response? We executed half a dozen of them, which began to turn people against us. And we then took 300 of the people who'd been most actively involved, and we sent them, we deported them, we interned them in a sort of couple of fields in Wales. And we chucked them all there together, and they were there together for 2 or 3 years. And when they came back to Ireland, they were far more extreme in their Irish nationalism than they'd ever been. And they came back they were fanatics by the time they came back. And they came back into an environment that the British have made worse by executing some of the ringleaders rather than showing clemency. And you know what really worries me, folks? Look, I have been warning for 10 years that we're making horrendous mistakes in terms of our gutlessness, in facing up to the mistakes of multiculturalism, in not vetting properly people who come into Britain. And I'm seen, I guess, by many in Westminster as a hardliner on this. But the last thing we should do is round up 3,500 people and put them in some internment camp somewhere. Because you know what? If we do that, we will turn hundreds of thousands of law-abiding Muslims in Britain onto the side of the bad guys. And that is really what I believe. Sure, we've got to monitor them. Certainly, we should stop anybody who's been to Syria. Just take their passports away. Get rid of them. I agree with that entirely. But I worry that this idea that we round everybody up actually will make the problem worse. That's how I feel. Please, anyone, if you agree with me or disagree with me, it's 0345 6060 973. I'm going next to Zach in Halifax. Zach, good evening. What on earth do we do, Zach, with nearly 3,500 people who pose this threat to us?
Do you know what? I disagree. I think we need to lock them up.
Do you? Okay.
Yes. I'm a proud British Muslim. I voted Brexit. I like some of the things, but I do think some people should back off the whole Muslim thing. We're normal. We're just like you, and we kind of go to work and do our things and enjoy things. But these are idiots. You know, these people. If they don't like this country, they need to be locked away.
But Zach, you know, you're a British Muslim, and you've said all the things you've said. But these people who are committing these acts of horror believe they're doing it in the name of Islam, Zach.
They're not doing it in there.
But they believe they are.
Do you know what you said? The hundreds of thousands of Muslims will not turn against this country. They'll actually support you. They'll say no, because the communities are fed up of it. We're fed up of it. There's a word we say, badnami. It's the shame and the things that these guys are doing. I mean, you had a caller before who was talking about the Salafis and the Wahhabis.
Yes.
This guy wasn't a Wahhabi or Salafi. He was a pothead. He was.
Do you know what, Zach? What is really, I'm pleased you've raised that. There's virtually no one that's been involved in suicide bombings or terror attacks in Europe over the last few years that has not had a habitual drug use problem.
There's one more thing I'd like to say. My son's Arabic Quran teacher. He's a prison imam, and he was part of the sort of counter-extremism project, so basically a de-radicalization project. And they would sit down, and he's a very, very learned man, and he'd sit down with them, because what these guys do, they'll take a little bit and take it out of context, and then they'll use that and they'll believe in that. A sentence that's half a sentence without the paragraph, and they'll stick by that. And people like him would then bring him and basically say to him, look, this is. They'll argue them and they'll make them see sense. And guess what happened? The government cut all the funding for this. So the problems that you have problems in prisons where they need to fix.
I mean, isn't Zach one of the questions here? Did Mrs May, as Home Secretary, during this period in which this deteriorated, did she do enough?
I don't think she did.
Well, nor do I. Because whenever she's questioned on this, she said, but I was the Home Secretary who deported Abu Hamza. But it took us 10 years to get rid of him.
If someone goes to Syria, wants to fight in Syria, personally, I think we should strip them off their citizenship. Even if they're born here, get lost, don't come back. We don't want them in this country. I don't want them in this country.
And she didn't do... Zach, I tell you what, I bet you, if we conducted an opinion poll on that basic question, we'd get monster support. We'd get 80% support, maybe even more, and yet Mrs May didn't do it. So, Zach, just to repeat, you think we should round up these 3,500 people and get them off our streets?
Yes, because you know what? It's disgusting. And if they want to if they want to fight, go to Syria. Leave, go, get out of the country. But don't attack innocents here.
Zach, your position is clear. Why do some strands of your religion interpret the Quran and behave in this way?
You have idiots in every religion.
Losers, as Trump would call them.
Losers. And unfortunately, these people that you can't. They're what can I say? I'm not allowed to swear on the radio, so I won't swear on the radio. But they're ignorant. My wife, she wears a headscarf. She's a doctor.
Okay,
She thinks the same as me.
They're ignorant, but they're dangerous. Zach, you're a star. Thank you. You made some really interesting points. I'm going to go to Naveen in Croydon. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Never thought I'd have to speak with you, but I need to today.
Please do.
To you, to everyone that follows your ethos, and to every Muslim out there. I'm a very proud British Asian Muslim.
Yes.
And there's a few points I'd like to make. Firstly, that point that you were saying to the last caller, I have to mention that in the Quran, and every single person who has put a hate tweet after Manchester, those poor parents, that has said ever in their life that these Muslims are killers, I want you to put your arrogance and your ignorance to one side. I want your integrity to listen today. In the Quran, repeatedly, it says you kill one innocent human, you kill the whole of humanity. It says that repeatedly.
That's in the earlier parts of the Quran, isn't it, as opposed to the later parts of the Quran?
In the Quran, they put up quotes saying, kill infidel, kill this. They forget to put that this is recitations of past wars that have happened when Islam was being persecuted for being spread. Now, that's one thing, whether you wish to accept that or not. You've had people like Jonathan Ross on his show saying, I've read that book cover to cover. It's the most peaceful book you can ever read. Now, back to today's time, okay? So I just want everybody to put ignorance aside and their...
Well, I tell you what, Naveen, there are lots and lots of people that want to get their comments on this show, and you just raised a very, very big point. So let's just deal with that. Of course, there are different interpretations of all religious documents, and that's been the case forever. But you have very passionately made your point that you see the Quran, you see the religion as being for peace, and you believe that very strongly and very passionately. Let me ask you, why is it then that some people who are adherents to your religion choose to take a completely different interpretation and threaten our way of life?
I tell you why. Okay, 2 points. First, if you pulled up one of those IS militants or any of those 3.5 jihadists, and you're saying 3.5, and I'll give you some statistics, okay, because I'm a former crime scene examiner for the Met Police.
Yep.
Now, firstly, I defy anyone to pull up one of those IS militants. I defy any of these jihadists to be pulled up. Other than Allahu Akbar, you ask them to recite one prayer, one translation of the Quran, they will not be able to do it.
Now, that may be right, but why, Naveen, why are they committing barbarity in the name of this religion? Why are they doing it?
I'll tell you why. Because the Quran is the only religion. You know, you say these interpretations. That's not true, because the Quran is the only holy scripture that has never had a single word changed. And Muslims are very passionate about that. Now, when you take a religion like that, and this was my point to you, to everyone that follows you, and to every Muslim, and I have said this on BBC Radio, on any Twitter, anywhere I can find, any platform, the day the word Islamist was added to Islamist IS, to Islamic State, we should have stood up. You know, when you got to say, why do you not integrate? We should have stood up and said, how dare you use that word? Change it to Daesh. I have asked this. Muslims should have stood up and said, do not hijack our religion. This is not Islam.
Well, actually, Naveen, isn't that what Donald Trump was saying in Riyadh? Isn't that exactly what he said? Because there were 50 of the biggest leaders of the Muslim world in that room, and what Trump was saying was, isn't it time you, Naveen, Donald Trump and others work together to drive out the extremists? Isn't that what we need to do?
I will tell you where this driving out comes from. Having been a crime scene examiner for the Met Police, the amount of cuts in the last 6 years that have come in with forensic evidence is not admissible because of budget cuts. You've got intelligence sitting there that can't be investigated, that can't be analysed because of budget cuts.
Well, now that's a slightly separate issue, but don't worry, Naveen, they brought the army in now, so all's going to be well. Listen, fascinating conversation. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:48. The Manchester loser, Salman Abedi, who killed those people, was known to have voiced extreme views, was known to have praised people who were suicide bombers, and yet despite all of this, he wasn't even on the list. The nearly 3,500 people that the authorities know are a serious terrorist threat in this country. And I'm asking you, what should we do with them? And views vary, but quite a few of you over the last couple of days are saying we should intern them, we should lock them all up. And I'm worried about that. And I wonder whether actually legally we can do that. Anna in Leicester, what do you think we should do?
Hi, Nigel. Great to talk to you.
Good evening.
I'm a human rights master's student, and the idea of sending them back, locking them up, taking out their passports is ridiculous, and it's not a country we want to live in, that we would be proud to live in. We mock countries that behave this way, and it's just outrageous. And listening to your previous callers, listening to Muslims having to justify themselves is a joke. It's like making men justify themselves for all the rapists in the world.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And it's interesting. You're studying human rights. I
am.
Is the reason, and I'm not saying we should deport people, and I'm not saying we should intern people, but is the reason that we really can't do it because of European human rights legislation?
Partly, but another part of it is that the focus should be on focusing on eliminating segregation, integrating people. Everybody has a freedom to their conscience, a freedom of thought and religion. We just have to respect that. And as long as they're not doing anything illegal, there's nothing we can do with them.
But whether European human rights make us a better world or not, they certainly restrict the power of government, don't they? Because when Theresa May was Home Secretary and attempting to deport Abu Hamza because of him constantly claiming various articles of human rights, it took 10 years to get rid of him. And if we're facing, I mean, let's just say, Anna, for argument's sake, and I hope I'm wrong, let's just say this situation deteriorated and got worse, and the government wanted to invoke emergency powers. Now, I'd be nervous about it, but supposing they wanted to do it, they couldn't do it, could they, as part of the European Convention on Human Rights?
No, they couldn't, but that's not a bad thing, because as soon as you start letting them do that, you have the government throwing people into jail for no reason, torture, no trials. That's not the kind of country we want to live in, where people disappear.
No, I understand the argument for, but what's interesting, Anna, is this. Theresa May, as Home Secretary, said we must withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, and now she's U-turned in the manifesto and says we're going to stay part of it until at least 2025. Can you be a tough Home Secretary and maintain the European Convention on Human Rights, for good or bad?
Yes, you can. You can.
So you would say, no. Listen, I'm not knocking your arguments. I'm just teasing them out. So you're saying that what we do with the 3,500 is we carry on as we've always done, and we say they are innocent until they do something wrong and make themselves guilty.
We do, and we also believe in the forces and the intelligence of our country, which is fantastic.
OK. Anna, thank you very much indeed. David on Facebook says you can remove those 3,000 jihadists, but another 3,000 will replace them. Remove those and you'll have 3,000 more. Oh, David, you're being negative, but maybe you're backing up my point that if we go for internment, we'll find ourselves with a lot more radical jihadists than we actually started with. And I'm thinking probably the last call of the evening is Martin from Anglesey. What do we do with these people, Martin?
Hello, Nigel. Good evening.
Good evening.
I have to sort of put my politics out front before I start. I have to say I don't agree with everything that Nigel Farage stands for.
Well, no one does. It's okay.
But I do think Nigel Farage speaks an awful lot of common sense, and I think that's one of the qualities that's missing in politics in the UK at the moment is common sense. And there are supposedly 3,000 of these people, 3,500. I wouldn't know what the number is.
Sure.
Sounds like a very, very big number to me. What I'd suggest is there's probably, 100, maybe 200 of these 3,500 people who I would regard as Premier League. Yeah? They're the people...
But how do you know, Martin? How do you know it's not...
How do I know? I don't know.
But let's suppose it's 10 times that number.
But 10 times that number is 2,000.
Yep.
Right. What I'm saying is, of the 3,500, there's probably an awful lot of those people who are just idiots. They're people who've gone onto websites and looked at the wrong thing, and with GCHQ having the capabilities it's got, it's pinged up a word in GCHQ, and all of a sudden they're on somebody's radar. What I'm talking about is the type of person who is really on their radar, the sort of person that is...
All right, so Martin...
Masters of MI5...
Martin, time's running out. So let's say there's a couple of hundred real baddies. What do we do?
I'll tell you what we do. We get the boys in blue and the anti-terrorist guys tonight, and we go and round them up, Nigel.
Martin, you've made the point.
Strong message.
Martin,
we are not going to put up with it.
You've made the point. Round them up, says Martin in Anglesey. That's the real bad guys. Now, I've had a bit of a go at the Prime Minister tonight. I feel as Home Secretary she did little or nothing. I feel the fact that she wants to keep us in the European Convention on Human Rights will limit her ability. But in the interest of balance, the Prime Minister today has said that the work undertaken throughout the day has revealed that it is a possibility that we cannot ignore that there is a wider group of individuals linked to this attack. As a result of the decision, the police have asked for all authorization from the Secretary of State for Defence to deploy a number of armed military personnel in support of their armed officers. You might also see military personnel deployed at certain events, such as concerts, sports matches, and helping the police to keep the public safe. So there we are. It's all going to be okay. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you, and we'll continue this conversation as the terror threat level is raised to critical and troops are deployed. Do you feel this is a response that...
today, haven't you? And we'll reflect a little bit later on in the programme about how the other NATO members responded to Trump's speech, telling them they've all got to pay a little bit more. But politics returned to some degree of normality today after the horrors of Manchester, and UKIP launched their manifesto this morning, I guess in a way in defiance of the Manchester terrorist attack, and we are back fighting a general election campaign. The manifesto was launched by party leader Paul Nuttall. Now, it'll be no secret to any of you that the last time UKIP launched a general election manifesto, it was me that was launching it. And you may say, well, how on earth can Nigel present the UKIP debate and do it as neutrally as he can? Well, I'll do my best, all right? I will attempt to give no opinion. I tried not to do that so with the Liberals or the Greens or the Conservatives or Labour. So here goes. What did the UKIP manifesto say? It said they want to reduce net migration into Britain to zero over the course of the next 5 years. They want a 5-year ban on low-skilled migrants coming into the country. On Brexit, they want us to walk away from the table as soon as we possibly can, and they want to bring back the blue British passport. On multiculturalism, they want to stop the burqa being worn in public, and on policing, they want 20,000 new police on the streets. They want more money for the NHS and extra money for social care. And how are they going to pay for it all? Well, they are proposing a radical cut in our foreign aid spending. At the moment, we spend 0.7% of the economy on foreign aid. UKIP would reduce it to 0.2%. And I think that, in essence, are the main points of the manifesto, but with one added feature. The whole conference this morning, the main theme that came out of it was a really very strong attack on Theresa May personally for her record as Home Secretary in terms of dealing with multiculturalism and the growth of terrorism. And I'm sure we'll get plenty of opinions as to whether that was the right, wrong, tasteful or not thing to do. So I'm asking you that with the launch of the UKIP manifesto, does it win your vote or not? And to get involved, you can call me on 0345 60 60 973. You can text through your view to 84850. You, of course, can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC as LBC. And you can watch us live on LBC's Facebook page right now. And I'm going to Jonathan in Moulton Sub Hamden, which is down in deepest Somerset. Good evening, Jonathan.
Hello, Nigel. Thanks for taking the call.
Not a bit. So what did you think of the UKIP manifesto?
I like what I see, and I saw it the launch this morning. I don't think it goes far enough, and something you said last night on air,
yeah,
I think is starting to gain more traction in the media, not necessarily TV media, but something that Colonel Richard Kemp said and other people have said, and you kind of knocked back a bit last night. The issue of internment of the 3,500 known troublemakers and jihadis that we currently have in the UK. My feeling is that this is something we are going to have to cope with and confront at some point, sooner rather than later. And the reason I say that is that because we are barely able to keep tabs on a small fraction of those 3,500 people, that's putting a massive strain on security forces. Surely if we detain them with a view to either deporting them if we can or permanently interning them if we can't deport them, that has to be a better solution than...
Well, Jonathan, I mean, Two quick points, Jonathan, there. I mean, firstly, it's not often people say, UKIP don't go far enough. They should be a lot tougher than they've been today, but you're suggesting that they should be. What Nuttall did say was that anybody that's been to Syria should not be allowed back into the country and should have their passport removed. He was very clear on that. Second point, OK, there are nearly 3,500 people on this suspected terrorist list, but as we also learn, this Abedi creature who committed that atrocity, he wasn't part of the 3,500, but he was known to the authorities to be linked to bad people. So you're probably, if you listen to some of the experts, Jonathan, you're probably talking somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 people that you would need to intern. Are you happy to go down that route?
Well, given that had we detained 3,500 people who were on the main list, that would have given us much more resource available to find people low on the food chain, like Abedi, because we wouldn't have had to monitor the people who were most at risk. So we focus on the lower tier.
Unless, of course, Jonathan, the very act of interning people has the effect that it had on the Irish nationalist movement, whereby you intern people, which leads to such public outrage at the unfairness of it that you radicalise yet more people. Last question, Jonathan, for you. Part of what Paul Nuttall and his Deputy Chair, Suzanne Evans, said today is that the Prime Minister, Theresa May's record on actually delivering things was lamentable. You know, whether it was dealing with immigration, non-EU immigration over which she had real power, whether it was dealing with multiculturalism, with division in society, with the growth of terrorism. The UKIP argument is that actually she's pretty weak and it needs a strong voice to make sure she actually does the right things. Do you think with that point that UKIP scored a hit?
Yes, I do, definitely. And I think I would go further and I say all leaders of all parties, apart from UKIP, bear some responsibility to a large or a larger or lesser degree.
Yes, Suzanne Evans today, Jonathan, did say that she thought Theresa May bore some responsibility for what had happened in Manchester, and that did lead quite a lot in the media to think she'd gone too far.
Yes, I saw her being grilled on Daily Politics by Andrew Neil, and I normally regard Andrew as a very fair commentator, but I think she came in for unjust criticism on that part, to be honest, because I firmly share the view that Suzanne Evans put forward there, that because we are facing these problems because of failures in public policy. They go all the way to the top of the leadership of all the parties.
Well, certainly that is a view, Jonathan, that is gaining ground. Jonathan, stay there, because I've got somebody here who might want to take you on with a different point of view. Morris in Edgware, good evening.
Good evening to you.
So you take a very different view, I understand.
My view is double, treble the number of police. So what? How would that have stopped the terrorists doing what he did?
Jonathan, Jonathan, respond to Morris. Morris says, even if you have more police, how would that have stopped the attack?
I wouldn't necessarily disagree with Morris, to be honest. It's not so much a question of resource, but how the resource is used. And it goes back to the internment issue. If you remove the highest people in the terrorist food chain from the public sphere, so to speak, then you can focus lower down the food chain. In terms
of resources, yeah. So Morris, there's the answer. Morris, the answer is.
Can I make another comment?
Please.
All that time ago, when Hamza was spouting his vile language in Finsbury Park.
Yep.
Why was he allowed to carry on like that? In the end, he was got rid of to the States. He could have been got rid of the moment he started. If you and I went out on the street, you and I went out on the street and started spouting like that, we'd be locked up.
Well, Morris, you're absolutely...
All the mamby-pambying, we can't do this, we can't do that. If there was an epidemic, health epidemic, they'd start doing something about it. So the same thing here. This has got to stop this nonsense, allowing all these people to do what... It's all right to hear about human rights. What about humane rights?
No, you make the point, and very strongly. And in fact, when it came to deporting Hamza and people like this, it took up to 10 years to get rid of these people from our shores. And why? Well, because of the European Convention on Human Rights, which the Prime Minister, who says they're going to get tough on terrorism, has decided we're going to stay part of until 2025. Jonathan from Somerset, thank you. Maurice, did you feel, I mean, you obviously feel very strongly on this issue, did you think UKIP got this right or wrong today in terms of their approach?
Well, they feel they've got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where they're getting their advice from, because as far as I'm concerned, many people, including you, Nigel, many people in politics don't know the ins and outs. They have to get advice from other people and then rubber stamp it later on.
Yeah. I mean, did you feel that their criticism of Theresa May was tasteful or was appropriate in the circumstances?
It's not appropriate. The only person to blame for anything is the person that perpetrated the evil act, plus the people that taught him.
Yeah, well, that's true, but there is also a slight question, Maurice, isn't there, that the authorities were informed 5 times that this guy could potentially be a danger, and perhaps, Maurice, through lack of resources and personnel, they don't get round to dealing with all of the potential problems.
Perhaps. The thing is surely the people behind the scenes, the ones we don't see, they know what's going on. Where's all this advice coming from? Don't do this, don't do that. We can't touch this person, we can't touch that. Why not?
Because I think actually, we've been a bit scared that if we were to act in a certain way, we might get called nasty things by the liberal mainstream media, Maurice. I suspect it's to do with cowardice, as much as anything else. Thank you, Maurice, from Edgware, for your call. James in Stoke-on-Trent. Good evening, James.
Hey, how you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm doing all right, yeah. So what did you think of the UKIP manifesto?
To be honest, mate, I was going to vote Conservative because I could only support UKIP with you there, but I've completely changed my mind because that manifesto is literally utterly flawless, mate. There's nothing wrong with that at all, is there? It's just pure common sense.
OK, and you had... I mean, have you voted UKIP before, or...?
No, I mean, to be honest, the only reason why I'm voting Conservative is because I think it'd just be such a catastrophe to have Jeremy Corbyn in charge. So that's the only reason. I just thought a vote for UKIP might be a vote for Labour. Do you see what I mean? So that's the only reason why I was giving it to the Conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
But this time I just thought, well, I think Conservatives probably are going to win, but I want their opposition to be you. I mean, UKIP. I mean, I would rather UKIP lead the country, but the chances of them actually winning are slim. So I thought, well, seeing that Conservatives are probably going to win anyway, I thought I'd better give my vote to UKIP to try and give them the big voice that they can, yeah.
James, you've said it very clearly. Thank you. James thought it was flawless, and he's switching from the Conservatives to UKIP. I'm keen to hear from you. If perhaps you've gone the other way, or you agree with James. The election campaign started again today with the launch of that UKIP manifesto, and I'm asking you whether it wins your vote or not. I'm keen to hear any view on this. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:15. Well, Paul Nuttall today launched the UKIP manifesto, and amongst other things, they want a ban on low-skilled migrants for 5 years coming into this country. They want net migration reduced to 0 within 5 years. They want big cuts to the foreign aid budget to give more money to the NHS and social care, and another 20,000 police officers on our streets or busy fighting terrorism. And I'm asking you whether that manifesto wins your vote or not. There is one part of the manifesto that I don't think could ever have come into being if I'd stayed as leader. And it is the section dealing with the 2003 Licensing Act, where UKIP say that the cafe culture that Tony Blair thought he was bringing into the country back in 2003 has led to more drunkenness, has led to more violence, and UKIP would like new legislation which would limit the hours that pubs and bars would be open selling alcohol, and would like fewer alcohol licences, which could mean fewer pubs on our high streets. That wouldn't have happened, would it, with me as leader? Right, I'm going to go to John in Belfast. John, what did you make of the UKIP manifesto?
Good evening, how are you?
I'm very well.
Well, I thought it was pretty good. I'm a first-time voter. This is the first election I'll actually be allowed to vote in.
Right.
And I'm seriously considering voting for UKIP. But I just think at the moment they're being way too politically correct at the moment. You know, talking about radicalism, extremism, and all of that, instead of addressing the fact that this violence comes from the religion of Islam itself.
It's funny, John, you say that, because the other parties. I heard Emily Thornberry from Labour and others who've been saying about UKIP in the last couple of weeks that actually the policy is disgusting because UKIP want to ban the burqa or the niqab in public, and they want, and this is the controversial bit, they want screening for girls at risk of female genital mutilation. So the mainstream political class, John, think UKIP have gone too far already, but you're saying they should go further.
Right, but that's because they're the mainstream political class. They don't reflect the attitudes of normal Englishmen or normal British people. I think they should really go after Theresa May on the fact that she said, for example, Sharia law is greatly beneficial for the UK. She's called Islam a great faith, which has nothing to do with all the recent terrorist attacks. She said that it was Islamism, not Islam, whatever that means. So yeah, I'd probably be willing to vote for UKIP if they propose something like a Trump-style ban on any further immigration of Muslims, because unfortunately, it is the only solution. It's the only way, even if it is 0.000. There's still, and this is how percentages work. The more you let in, the more terrorism you will have. We have so many politicians here saying that if you demonize Islam, then we'll make Muslims hate us more. They're just so hypocritical. In one breath, they'll say that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. In the next breath, they'll say that if you criticize Islam, then we'll be making more terrorists.
So, John, I've always tried to draw a distinction myself with political campaigning that actually the vast majority of Muslims living in Britain are not just law-abiding, but they're integrated, and that what we do not need to do is to attack the entire religion, just the strains of it that are causing these problems. But you think there's a more fundamental problem, clearly.
I would argue that if the mere fact of addressing the problem honestly is enough to tip thousands of young Muslims over into jihad mode, then we are in a much more serious situation than we thought. Because when people talk about extremist, radical Islam, what they're really talking about is just conservative, orthodox Islam. Because,
Yeah, John, we mustn't get too theological, I think, tonight on this programme. But basically, you think UKIP's OK with its manifesto, but should have gone a bit further?
Yes, I think that they need to be addressing this problem honestly. I think that they need to stop talking about Islamism and radicalism and all those other things and address the fact that this comes from the Quran itself. It comes from the example of Muhammad. Stop being so squeamish about this, because it's the only political party that are willing to talk about this honestly, and they're not at the moment. I think it's tragic.
John, thank you very much, John, for your call. That's the second caller tonight saying UKIP actually need to be a lot tougher than they're being. And your texts and tweets. Hello, Nigel. I don't want to talk on air. I don't know what they're frightened of. But I do want to say I've read the UKIP manifesto. It's impressive. That's Gillian from Sevenoaks. After the awful events of this week, we could all do with some light relief. And UKIP's manifesto certainly makes us chuckle. I'm glad the party isn't being taken seriously anymore, says Andy. UKIP blames Mrs May, but we should blame Europe's no borders policy, says Chris. And I'd like all the jihadi returners to lose their British passports and not be allowed back into the UK. And I'm going to Portugal, to Ruth. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes. So what did you make of the manifesto?
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, I've got a few questions for you first before I tell you what I make of the manifesto.
Well, we haven't got forever, Ruth. But a couple of quick questions. Go on.
I know. Well, first of all, quick question: why would you want a blue passport?
Well, I personally want a passport with the words European Union taken off it. I want it to be a British passport. That is what I...
It's not necessarily a blue passport, right?
That is what I... Hang on, Ruth. You asked me the question. I'm going to answer. Yeah. That is what I campaigned for all the way through the referendum. I kept whipping the passport out of my pocket and saying, I want this to be a British passport. I didn't actually, at any point, personally say that I wanted it to go back to being blue. And the proposal that we should get that passport back, Ruth, isn't mine, it's UKIP's, OK?
OK, so let me tell you something, OK? Because I'm originally from Israel, and I did have a blue passport my whole life. Yeah. My children now are British citizens, OK? So I do care about what happens in the UK. I do care a lot, actually. I'm now a Portuguese citizen, so I do have a Burgundy passport, that's the European Union, and I do think it does give you a lot of freedom, which I didn't have before, okay, at first, regarding the blue passport. Then regarding the burqa, I think basically banning the burqa will just make the Muslims more likely to be victimized, whereas educating the Muslims, because I think most of the Muslims don't actually know what's in the Quran and what actually their religion is reflecting. So let's say, okay, I'm not sure I'm making myself very clear, but I think Islam is basically a reflection of Muhammad, and I don't think most Muslims are really aware of that. So instead of banning the burqa and saying, okay, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you might as well educate every child in the UK on what every religion is, including Islam, and that might be much more efficient than banning the burqa.
Well, it might be, Ruth. I mean, UKIP's point, the point they're making with the burqa, with talking about Sharia courts, the point they're making is that everybody should have equal rights and be treated equally under the law, and UKIP allege that there are many women living in Britain in Islamic families who are not given the same rights as other women, and that's what they're talking about, Ruth.
Well, British law should be the law that governs. Sharia law actually contradicts a lot with British law, and I do not know why actually British courts allow this to happen.
Well,
but that's a different question.
Well, in a sense, you're saying, Ruth, that you agree with that bit of the UKIP manifesto, but you're concerned about the passport, yeah?
Should not exist in Britain, because Britain should have British law, but that's completely different than banning the burqa, because if you're going to ban the burqa, that's a tiny bit that you're doing that's going to give the Muslims a lot to say that they're being victimized.
Okay, so given the pros and cons that we've discussed, what marks out of 10, Ruth, would you give the UKIP manifesto?
Oh, God, that's a very difficult question. I don't know. The blue passport gives it a very big minus, because I think it limits you and it makes a statement that you're isolating yourself from the rest of the world. And that's based on my own experience as an Israeli with a blue passport, okay? And that's based on my own experience now with a burgundy passport. It gives me so much more freedom as an individual, okay? So I think it's a statement you should not do as a country that actually advocates for tolerance and...
Well, Ruth, you can argue about burgundy passports and freedom, but I would say this to you, Ruth, it's that the British people voted against in the referendum last year. And I thank you very much for your call from Lisbon, although the weather here is rather like Lisbon today. I'm going to go to Corrie in Dartford. Corrie, what did you make of it?
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
I'm all right.
First and foremost, my sincere condolences to all the people who lost their lives and the families of the people who lost relatives in the bombing.
Well, we all share that, Corrie,
Thank you for all the work. I know, I agree. Thank you for all the work you've done with Brexit and to shine light on specific issues. As somebody who's been only recently into politics, because I'm only 21, I had to look at different manifestos and to choose which type of policies I liked. I think the manifesto, it basically shone light fundamentally on the NHS and the 11 billion a year.
Well, what they're talking about saving billions from the foreign aid budget, which they say we could spend on the NHS and social care. That's what they say.
0.2% of GDP they're proposing.
They're proposing down from 0.7 to 0.2. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, I think that was Obama's one. And also there was a study out in 2015, I think, which suggested that trade with the countries is actually better than mismanaged spending on foreign aid. So I actually agree with Paul on that. So I actually think the UKIP manifesto has some points which I would change. I don't think we can actually go around banning burqas or banning the EU flag, because that's one of our libertarian style or liberal style traits. But the reason why I called, though, even though I agree with some of the policies and disagree with some of the policies, is I'm wondering what UKIP's stance, and I think I know your stance because you know Rand Paul in America, but what UKIP's stance is on non-interventionism.
Well, I think that UKIP, traditionally, UKIP has said that military intervention is the last resort, and that is still very much the policy.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, that's what I was wondering. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes, Corrie. Give it marks out of 10.
I would give the updated policies about 8 out of 10. I don't really like the burqa ban, and I don't really like the EU flag ban. I can't really see how that a liberal policy. But other than that, the NHS funding is fundamentally acceptable, and the actually 0.2% of GDP for foreign aid. People will think that we're
Corey, you've run out of time, man. I thank you very much indeed for your call. Yeah, and UKIP promising money for the NHS. Other parties too promising extra money for the NHS, but nobody else promising to radically cut the foreign aid budget. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC at 7:30, and general election campaigning resumed today with UKIP launching their manifesto. But the other thing to tickle me today is Donald Trump has been in Brussels today. Now, not the sort of city where you'd think he'd necessarily get the best of responses. And he went to the NATO headquarters, brand new NATO headquarters, big, shiny building that's cost about €1 billion to build. And he gave a speech. He said that only 5 of the 28 NATO members were actually paying the membership fee the club demands, which is that people spend 2% of their economy on defence. And you can see that speech. It's there on LBC's website. But what is delicious are the faces of the other leaders as Trump is saying it's not good enough, and basically you owe us massive amounts of money. If you want to laugh, have a look. Trump was not holding back in Brussels today. And I have to say, I 100% agree with him. I think if you're in a club and it is a mutual defence pact, as NATO has been for all these years, and if you want it to develop, to perhaps work together to deal with radical jihadi terrorism and other things, people have got to pay their way. He also today met with Donald Tusk and my old friend Jean-Claude Juncker. And there is a photograph of them sitting together in a meeting room, not exactly looking comfortable, being in each other's company. We don't as yet know anything about that conversation. But what is interesting is that Juncker's line, when it comes to NATO and defence, is to say we shouldn't be bullied by the Americans. There's no need to spend 2% on defence because we're going to have our own bright, shiny, new European army. And I'm guessing at some point before too long, we will reports will filter out as to what was actually said in that meeting. But yesterday, as we talked about Salman Abedi, we talked about some of the motivations that perhaps were behind what he did in killing all of those people. I raised a point, and it was that once again, here was somebody who was a frequent and heavy cannabis smoker. Do you remember I said this last night? Well, if you go through and you look back, you see that Jihadi John, remember him? The guy that was beheading people, again, a heavy, regular cannabis smoker. You look at the guys that murdered Lee Rigby in the streets of London, again, regular, repeated, heavy cannabis users. You look at the Tunisian beach killer who killed 30 people last year, a regular, heavy cannabis user. And you know something? The list, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, the list goes on and on and on. To me, it seems almost impossible that there isn't somehow a link of some kind. Now, I know very little about this, about the effect that perhaps regular use of cannabis or other drugs can have on people's minds. And to help me this evening, I've got Dr. Robert Lefevre, who is an addiction specialist, a former GP and author of Kick Your Habit. Robert, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. So tell me, Robert, I literally know very little about this at all, but what is it that repeated cannabis use does to people's view of reality?
Well, the thing it does in particular is to damage mood, memory, and motivation. The mood is all over the place. They may still think intellectually straightforwardly, but their moods go up and down totally unpredictably. Their memory is unreliable. They can't remember what they said last time. And so to try to make out that they're completely up to speed, they make it up. And the third thing, motivation. They easily prey to people saying, this is what you need to do, this is the way you need to think, this is the way you need to behave, because they're losing all sense of personal self-esteem and motivation. So mood, memory, and motivation are the things that are particularly damaged, and that can cause absolute havoc, as you rightly have drawn attention to.
The funny thing is, Robert, I kind of thought that people that smoke pot on a regular basis were sort of laid back and half asleep, and yet is it possible that this drug, or perhaps others, can lead towards violent thinking or behaviour?
It can do, but you're quite right that cannabis usually gives people the munches. They start eating crazily and they fall asleep. But what you're talking about here in your summary was heavy, regular use.
Yes.
That becomes a major drug and has major effects on the brain. After all, the brain is a chemical substance. It's a physical chemical substance, and it is affected by physical chemical things. We damage our brain when we use mood-altering substances and processes. And I personally, haven't used any mood-altering substance for the last 32 years. But my life now is so much happier than it ever was. Previously, I looked for magic fixes. I wanted something out there to fix the emptiness that I felt in here. Nowadays, I don't feel empty in here. I have a wonderful life with my wife and with my writing and my counselling work, and I'm so happy. I could not believe my luck.
Well, there's an awful lot of people out there. A lot of people out there, Robert, who it seems are being, regardless whether it links directly to terrorism, but whose lives are being wrecked by this stuff. What are, for concerned parents perhaps listening to this show, what are the signs that people should look for in terms of drug misuse?
In cannabis, it damages mood, memory, and motivation.
Yep.
People do not achieve in the way they did before. They change their friends. They change their activities. With cocaine, you get a paranoia. You think you're being followed and threatened all the time. With acid, you think you've got supernatural power. This is why people taking LSD believe sometimes that they can fly, and they jump off high buildings and actually kill themselves. With speed, amphetamines, it speeds you up. And they start talking capital, and it doesn't make any sense. So those are the things that are specific to those drugs. But with all drugs, they cause poor judgment. As I say, intellectually they may still be okay, but their feelings are all over the place. They see enemies as friends and friends as enemies. The people who are giving you the drugs are the greatest friends ever, and the people trying to help you to get off them are your greatest enemies. And so what happens is that you change your values and change your relationships, and you need help from other people who've been there and understand it from inside. And that's what I try to do, because my previous addiction, made me a crazy man. But I'm not now.
You sound incredibly. In fact, you sound laid back beyond belief and very happy with your life. Robert, thank you very much for giving us that brief. I really do appreciate it. Interesting, isn't it, what he said about how you sort of divide the world up, and your friends become your enemies, and your enemies become your friends. I can't put any more science, folks, into it, but there does seem to be some very, very strong link between these young men who smoke a lot of cannabis and then get involved in terrorism. I know what the word for them is. Trump used it the other day, didn't he? Losers. Right, we're back to UKIP. The manifesto launch, some big ideas and some strong criticism, very strong criticism of the Prime Minister Theresa May's record as Home Secretary, which some thought was distasteful. The idea that she bore some responsibility for Manchester. Many in the journalistic class thought UKIP had gone too far. On Facebook, Keith says to me, as much as I'd like them, UKIP can't win this time round. Russell says UKIP's job is to remind the people that there are millions that wanted Britain back. Colette says, don't get into the game of making excuses for these terrorists. I wasn't aware that I did. And I get on Twitter, P.S. I will vote Labour, the best option in a bad bunch. Well, fine. But it's UKIP we're talking about. And we're going to the Ronda, to Ian. Ian, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
What did you make of the UKIP manifesto?
Dangerous, reactionary, divisive. People should be very fearful, I think, of what UKIP is saying at the moment.
What, Ian, we've had callers on tonight saying UKIP doesn't go far enough, and you're saying it goes way too far. Can you just sort of pick out one thing from that UKIP manifesto launch today that you think is actually dangerous?
Well, I think the whole pitch of UKIP is to scapegoat minorities, and in this occasion, UKIP is scapegoating Muslims.
Is it?
And I just think that is unhelpful.
Okay. When you say
banning the burqa, for example.
Yeah, well, that's very mainstream now, Ian, isn't it? I mean, the French have done it, and the Belgians have done it, and there are other European countries on the verge of doing it. I mean, this is a very mainstream thing now.
Well, it doesn't seem to have helped the French in terms of attacks. It doesn't seem to have helped the Belgians. You know, we've got to, if we're going to stop terrorism, we need to look at the root cause of the problem.
Yes, and Ian, UKIP would argue that one of the whole points of their manifesto today and their campaign over the last few weeks is that they have an integration agenda. As opposed to state-sponsored multiculturalism, which has divided societies, they want to bring people together so that we all live under the same law.
No, UKIP has got nothing to do with integration. UKIP is about excluding people whose skin is a different colour from the average
that's a new
white
one.
Man in the UK.
I thought it was Eastern Europeans we hated. Now, I mean, you know, Ian, OK, I get it. You're not a UKIP supporter, and this manifesto probably makes you dislike UKIP even more, because in some ways they've said things that are much stronger than perhaps I said back in 2015. Ian, I thank you very much for the polite way in which you did your best to tear the UKIP manifesto to pieces. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's 7:46. It's UKIP launching their manifesto today, resuming the general election campaign. Just to remind you, I'm not here to campaign for the party. I'm here to invite your view on what you think of that manifesto and whether it makes you more or less likely to vote for them. Exactly the same as I did with the Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dem and Green manifesto launches. Paul in Lewisham, what did you make of that manifesto launch?
I just wanted to talk about the burqa thing, really. That's the bit that concerns me. I mean, I don't think banning the burqa is a good idea I don't think it's going to achieve anything. Because in this country, when all the good things that the Muslims do, nobody ever talks about. Like, we got the Shard building, and the guy who owns the Harrods is the same guy, Al Maktani, the owner of Qatar.
Yep.
When he put that big structure up and created jobs for our people, nobody talks about that. They was all boasting about, oh yeah, mate, I was home by 3 o'clock. Everyone's getting paid and feeding their families. No one wants to know. No one says, oh, thanks to the Arabs or the Muslims for all the good things they do. Everyone talks about the negative stuff as soon as something goes wrong.
Well, I think
the burqa. I mean, what's that going to achieve? If you was walking down in a club and you saw a girl with ginger hair and you didn't like her, you don't have to sleep with her. You're not going to sleep with a woman with a burqa. So why does it concern you so much?
Well, I suppose it would concern people because you wouldn't actually know, Paul, whether it was a woman or a man. And hang on. And in an age when we are increasingly worried about security and terrorism, remember that one of the London tube bombers all those years ago escaped by wearing a burqa. So there is perhaps a strong security argument for saying people should not cover their faces.
Oh, fair enough. I don't know what I can say about it. I didn't realise he'd escaped by wearing a burqa, but that was a long time ago. And these new terror attacks that we've had recently, they had nothing to do with the burqa. And it's just, I don't know, it's a step backwards. We need to be more creative. If take Modi from, President of India.
Yeah.
When the attacks happened in India, he said, these are not Muslims. These are like the people, when there was a backlash, when people started turning on each other, he said the Muslims in India are not Muslims. They are our Muslims. And he did whatever he could. He gave them free laptops or whatever and tried to do what he could to build bridges. Now, we need to be more creative. I'm not saying give laptops to a load of Muslims. I'm saying maybe we should be saying to the rest of the world, our Muslim community is our Muslims, and we are, we've got to think outside the box rather than putting hate on top of hate. We could open fertility clinics. We could say, look, create our own new Muslim race, for example. You know.
Well, I don't think we're going to get into that sort of eugenics. But Paul, was there anything in the UKIP manifesto you thought was attractive and appealing?
Well, I don't know. It's always the same. They're like everyone else says. Everyone's a bit weak, aren't they? So you got to
tell me something, Paul. Are you going to vote? Are you going to vote for anybody, Paul?
I'm going to vote, but I'm drawn between the Communist Party and Labour.
Okay, well, okay. I'm not going to comment on that because I'll get myself into terrible trouble. But I think you'll find that the Communist Party are actually not standing in this election because they're supporting Jeremy Corbyn. I think I'm right in saying that. Paul from Lewisham, I thank you for your call. I get a Lisa in Barnet. Lisa, good evening.
Oh, good evening, Nigel. Nice to speak with you. Thank you for everything you've done. I just think it's a terrible mistake for UKIP manifesto to just say ban the burqa. It should be ban face coverings because I want to see people's faces. If they're on a protest meeting or wherever they are, I need to see their face. And I think it's singling out, and that's what's causing problems.
Yeah, I mean, what they say in the manifesto is they'd ban people in public from wearing the niqab or the burqa because the party says they are dehumanising.
But I'm against the burqa, and I'm against them, but I think it would be more sensible to have banning face coverings because I don't want to see it at protest meetings either. If I met you, I don't want to see you with your face covered. I want to see you. I want to look in your eyes. I want to look at your mouth. We can talk to each other. That's what's behind that. And that's why I'm so against the burqa.
OK, so you think basically UKIP are right, but they've got the language wrong.
I think that's absolutely right.
Lisa, you've made your point absolutely clearly and beautifully. I thank you. George in Tooting, what do you make of the UKIP manifesto?
Love your show. I have one little problem with the UKIP manifesto, and that is the bit where it's saying that it wants to withdraw from the Paris climate change agreement because it has no basis in science. And, I kind of get that, climate sort of fits with academia and sort of, the liberal elites. But the science is very clear that climate change is happening, and it has an absolute solid base in science. So I think that point is that it has no base in science is fundamentally dishonest.
I think that one of the arguments here, George, is that UKIP are saying that they would remove VAT from domestic energy bills and they would scrap green levies, which, doing those things, would save people, the average household, about £170 a year. And I think the argument is that, is it climate change? Is it global warming? I mean, UKIP is very sceptical about all of this, and you clearly have a problem with that. I completely understand that, but to actually say that it has no basis in science when the body of evidence is so overwhelming is dishonest. Well, there are more scientists that say that increases in CO2 are leading to higher temperatures than the other way, but actually, George, there are also scientists who say it makes virtually no difference.
But the manifesto says there is no basis in science, which is fundamentally dishonest, and that's really my point.
OK, George, no, you've made your point. Thank you very much indeed. And my last call of the evening is going to be Mike in Norwich. Mike, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I would say I'll try and get through this as best as I can because I'm a little nervous,
Oh, don't be nervous. Just spit it out, man. Spit it out. Tell me what you think. Go on.
I agree with most of it.
Yep.
I'd probably give it 9 out of 10.
Yep.
I would say my partner and I have voted for our local UKIP candidate already, Dave Borland.
Well, I can't go into constituencies or anything like that.
That's fine. I don't agree with abolishing the House of Lords. I think it needs serious reform. I think the numbers need to fall. And I think they could scrap the £300 per day allowance. I mean, really, does Alan Sugar need £300 a day?
Yeah, fine. Well, UKIP are radical on that. They now want to get rid of the House of Lords. What was the best bit of the manifesto, Mike?
The best bit, I mean, I actually joined because of the education policies in 2015. I mean, I graduated in teaching in 2008. And at the end of the day, a teacher's there to teach. They're not there to be a social worker, to be an administrator, to be, God knows how much else. So.
Sure. But Mike, we're out of time, I'm sad to say, because I know you're a first-time caller, and I hope you do call again. But basically, your position is that you're sticking with UKIP at this general election.
Oh, yeah.
Lovely. Mike, thank you very much. Well, lots of opinions there. Mike is a UKIPper who's sticking with them. We had one person who was going to vote Tory, like what Nuttall had to say, is going to vote UKIP. Others who are very worried, who don't like face coverings in any way at all. Others who are concerned that UKIP aren't with the climate change lobby. I'll give one opinion on this, which is I think it was absolutely right for UKIP today to go ahead with their manifesto launch. Yes, what happened in Manchester on Monday was appalling, but the point of what happened in Manchester is they want to stop our democratic process. We want it to continue, all of us. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back on Monday from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. And we're going to continue this conversation and also take a look at the UKIP manifesto.